I should be done. My presentation's first, and then I should be done. You have to stay.
No, I don't have to see them. So there's a couple things.
So which one we're going to do first?
Yeah, they moved me to the first. And then I don't know either.
Charles trying to get your attention.
Bill and John?
We're online now.
Oh, okay.
10 a.m. So
Yes, we'll
please stand
figure
for
it
the
out.
Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. It's Wednesday, December 13th, 10 a.m. This is a regularly, or not a regular schedule, it's a scheduled Board of Commissioner workshop. We have several items on the agenda. Item 2, are there any amendments? Commissioner Boyce?
Mr. Chair, I understand we have some people in the audience. I'm going to defer first to Administrator Hitt, if I may.
Okay.
Just as you and I discussed, Mr. Chairman, yesterday, based on some schedules of the folks that needed to be here as part of Doug Robbins' discussion of our communications tower and system, we felt it best to plan that for 1:30 this afternoon. And then Carolyn Johnson had some folks here with her as well, so to start the meeting with them. And then once they're done, we would do the other two, the public records policy and the road fund loan proposals, and then break for however long we need to break, and then come back for the communications towers issue.
Okay, so you want to move what is shown as item 5, wildlife hazards.
To number 1.
You want to move that to number 2.
Well,
or
I'd
to
say,
basically
or actually
above
3.
roads.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, above roads.
So is it 1?
Well, roads is 3, so we won't change numbers so much.
Yeah,
We'll just
okay,
move where
okay,
that's going to move and precede now item 3, road fund loan. So we're moving 5 to 3.
Right.
Okay. And then it's followed by what is shown as 3 road funds, then the public records, then this afternoon, the communication towers discussion.
Yes.
Was there something else on?
I have something else, Mr. Chair, when you're
Well,
ready.
just a reminder that the folks, again, some of them are coming from Medford, I believe, on the communication tower, that we would reconvene at 1:30.
At 1:30.
Yep.
Were you going to address this, or? I thought I understood yesterday that was going to come.
Oh, yes, actually, John Huddle had some comments about this.
Okay, so when we get to county council then.
What are we talking about?
Okay.
Nuisance abatement, they're just
So we can,
well, we can't deal with it today, but just some
Understand.
direction for staff.
but there's an urgency on that.
Oh, definitely some urgency, yes, I
Okay,
agree.
but we'll wait
Abatement.
till county council speaks as far as any additions then, and that
Right.
should come up there. So do you want to defer to county council first?
Absolutely. That was
Okay,
going to be
county
my.
council?
Well, thanks, Mr. Chair. Since the last meeting, I've done a little work on nuisance abatement options, particularly on the Hamilton Lane property, and I just could present those and then the action. Oh, I am not Mike.
Off
Thanks,
the air.
Commissioner Boyce. Yeah. So again, since the last meeting, I researched some options on nuisance abatement on the Hamilton Lane issue, and I want to present those options to the board, and then possibly direction to bring back at the January 3rd meeting for some action. So shouldn't take long, but I think if you add it at the end, that would make sense.
Let's say the end after the public records policy this morning.
If that's appropriate,
If we have time, we'll put it there.
And-
Sure,
and I-
wherever it fits in.
Okay.
Right, and I think we would probably have time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so we're going to move that to, and we'll just call it nuisance abatement options. That's the title on this memo. Council. and then to Commissioner Boyce.
I have nothing further.
Okay. Then do we have a motion to approve the amendments as noted?
Approve the agenda as amended, yes, Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
I'll second that. Call for the question.
Aye.
Aye. Just for the record, also to introduce from my left is Administrator Hitt. Commissioner Gold is not here today. Myself, Commissioner Huxley. To my right, Commissioner Boyce. To his right, County Council, and then to County Council's right, the Commissioner's Clerk, John Jesuit. Okay, so we're going to then move to what is shown on the agenda as item 5, but we've moved it. It's going to be wildfire hazards. And Community Development Director Johnson.
Good morning. Carolyn Johnson, Community Development Director. Thanks for taking the time this morning. I wanted to talk with you about some potential new wildfire hazard regulations to add to the zoning code. Last year, or earlier this year, the Planning Commission reviewed a whole series of requirements to include when we review plans for building out in the county. And they really mirror a lot of what we already require in the forest grazing zone and the timber zones. Things like having fire safety areas, a primary and a secondary fire safety area. Things like fire retardant roofs, making sure you have enough water on the site to fight a fire, having really good access to the dwelling so that emergency vehicles can get to you if they need to. And all of these are now in our current code for areas that are designated for forest grazing and timberlands where you can build a single home in those areas. But as we witnessed with the fire a little while back, fires don't respect zoning code boundary lines. And it was fortuitous that we had the Planning Commission had already looked at expanding those requirements into areas where there would be a potential for fire. Behind you are 4 maps. If you want to take a look, they are produced by the Department of Forestry, identifying areas in the county where there is a high fire risk. And we worked, the Planning Commission and staff worked on that with the Department of Land Conservation and Development to come up with something that we could include in the zoning code for those areas, irrespective of whether or not they were forest grazing or rural residential or some other named zoning district. So these regulations, like I said, would be very similar to what we have on the books for forest grazing. But what would happen is when somebody came in to apply for a building permit, our staff would take a look at the map and identify whether the property was in one of those high fire areas. And if it was, then the requirements of these new regulations would be applied to that new development, much like we already do with the forest grazing land, where we presume you're in a high fire area. This would also require that we adopt those maps that have been created by the Department of Forestry. And the map would kind of be the trigger for us to decide whether or not we were going to impose these requirements on new development. So we've gotten through about, I'd say, half the process of getting this to you as the entire board to adopt it. But when you get about to this point in the process, you have to ask yourself, well, okay, now it's time to really go public with this. Our Planning Commission meetings are public, but rarely do people come. And so rather than go public in a public hearing where folks get 3 minutes to talk and they've received a notice in the mail that says there's a zoning change contemplated that may affect your property values, which gets them pretty worked up because they don't even know what's in the regulations at that point. What I had intended to do was go out and hold some community meetings so that we would go to people in their own areas and talk with them about what these regulations would entail, and we'd get all their feedback, and then we would come to the board with the draft regulations and much of their feedback for the board to take action to either authorize the effort or not. But before we go to all that trouble, because it's very costly to put these postcards together and hold meetings, etc., I wanted to share with you what the plan was to move forward and see if I could get some nods or kind of consensus that the board's comfortable with this type of approach. The approach would include using our Citizen Involvement Committee. 2 members are here, Member Carl King and Member John Bishop. Kevin McHugh is also on that committee, and they would be really the leaders in doing the outreach to the community. I'm anticipating we would hold a couple, 2-3 meetings out, maybe one here, one in the North County, one in the South County. They each represent different areas of the county so that we could engage people one-on-one without any constraints of a time clock or, you know, the tight squeeze of a small room when a lot of people get fired up. So that's kind of the plan. We've had some input and interest from Chief Brazil and Jeremy Dumeyer, the Emergency Services Coordinator, has also weighed in on this, and he's willing to help. Also heard from Michael Zorotic, the Director of the Brookings Rural Fire District, and Lance Brown, the President of the Upper Chetco Fire District. So the idea here is to get the kind of the leaders and the outreach people to the folks that live in the county to get their say-so on this and see what they think and to share with them all the information before we come to the board for any kind of final decision. And I think that Mr. King has a comment or two, and I don't know if John, if you had any comments, but we'd like to invite you to engage with us and talk about this, ask any questions, and we're here to see what we can do to move this forward.
Before we have, I know I've spoken with, Carolyn, with you yesterday on speakers. I think you were going to touch, I talked base with Administrator Hitt, that there were some that were involved in this, from Citizens Committee to fire chiefs, et cetera, et cetera. I would ask, I think I'm okay with it if you're okay with it on this.
Certainly, thank you.
But I would ask that you fill out, just so we have it on the record, that you guys each, as Chief Brazil did here, fill out a public speaker slip.
Okay.
So if John Bischoff is also going to speak or not, to fill one out, or anyone else, or okay, great. So we just have these on the record. And is Jeremy going to speak too, or no?
He's okay for now.
Okay.
Carl King on Nasika Road. I am the Center County representative on the Citizen Involvement Committee. Since I moved here, I think I've been involved with one or another committee helping out at what is now community development in the process, and specifically more recently in looking at ways to get the citizens involved in the zoning process. When Carolyn met with us to talk about starting this process, I was, and I still am, hesitant based upon what has happened recently, because this process is no different than the process that was undertaken by community development, the Planning Commission, and others with respect to other hazard districts where hours and hours were spent refining language, reviewing proposals from the state, looking at maps. And after all of that, it died here at the commissioners' hearing because a relatively small group of, compared to the number of people involved, appeared and opposed it in many respects simply because it was a new regulation. And so the end result of that is that people in Curry County who live in areas that current science says are subject to slides or problems during earthquakes are looking at maps that are 20 to 30 years old, that are inaccurate compared to what the new maps are. And the most that happens now with respect to that is that when they come in for an approval for a permit, community development and the permitting people will tell them, here are the maps that apply to Curry County, but you really should look at these other maps because they're more accurate. We can't make you take steps to protect yourself against those hazards shown on those new maps, but we think you should be aware of them. And these 4 maps behind you could do the same thing. And we wouldn't spend the money, and I wouldn't spend hours of my time reaching out to people and trying to get them involved and attend meetings and get in their input. So I think, I think it's very important for the Board of Commissioners to give some signal as to whether, when we get to the end of the road, we're not going to see a knee-jerk reaction against new regulation defeat everything that we've done. Thank you.
Mr. King?
Yes,
Thanks
sir.
for your involvement on this, and I know you've been doing it for a couple of years, Mr. Bischoff, thank you. When you mentioned, and Director Johnson also mentioned, people very seldom come to the Planning Commission hearings, and yet before or even, we run the risk of the interest dying off again after the fire. So when you mention we can't force the people to protect themselves, but they also, as you well know, have a responsibility to protect their neighbors. And it's in the interest of public awareness, these meetings that you're recommending, I think that might even be a higher priority than just, educating them on why these regulations are important, and just to keep the notification to those folks. I don't know of any place in Curry County that isn't susceptible, some to a greater degree than others, but this is just something that we need to stay on top of, and I think this is great work. I think the timing's good, and I hope that we can get a lot of public support, and I certainly will be pursuing this and helping any way I can. And it relates to the Firewise communities too, which I think it'll transcend or transition into that in addition.
Thank you.
It's a good thing this is a workshop, so we could just kind of have a,
If I could make one comment before Chief Brazil speaks. Mr. King's comments about the last batch of hazards that you looked at. That was handled in a very classic way that most planners use, that you go to a planning commission, you hold meetings, and then you move on to the next group. And that doesn't always work. And we found that it did not work very well in that scenario, which is why we want to move to this new method. I think in a county this size, with this many varied situations, it's really important to go to the people before you go for a final action. There's a lot of constraints when you come to a planning commission meeting or a board meeting. You only get a certain amount of time to talk. You aren't really supposed to collaborate with your neighbors and talk too much because you don't want to disturb the meeting. And we found that in workshop settings with the community, that can be alleviated. That happened when we had the Flores Lake workshops, which was very successful. So I think that big picture, This could be a little bit of a groundwork for a new type of model for outreach to the community on changes in regulations. So we really hope that you'll support this idea of going to the community. But I'll let Chief Brazil speak now. He might have a few words to share.
Do you know, I've seen these maps before, but I'm missing how recent they are. Do you know that by chance?
I believe it's either
2013 is dated right on the map.
yeah. And
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
the Department of Forestry, the group that put these maps together, have indicated that when it is time to go to the board for action on this, they will come and make a presentation as to how the maps were established and what went into that. Okay? So.
Just a clarification too. Now that's referencing the Oregon Department of Forestry, but there's another note down here for a credit is referencing Dugami in 2016. So I don't know.
Yes.
Perhaps they added something to the map so that there's some
They worked with-
2013 and some input from 2016.
That's probably true.
Okay.
They worked together. They looked at a whole series of hazards for our county, including the liquefaction, landslide, tsunamis, coastal erosion, and wildfire. So it was a pretty big effort on the part of the state to investigate our area to find those hazards. I think that when you talk to the individual from Dogami last time on the liquefaction and landslides, he mentioned that Curry County, they had been awarded money to work just on Curry County for those landslide and liquefaction maps. So Curry County's gotten some love in that regard, and at this point, though, we just want to move forward with the wildfire piece.
Mr. Johnson, in your staff report under the plan, you mentioned this is a bit of a deviation. I think that's justified here, so I'm glad you kind of took that step.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Yeah.
John Brazil, 15694 Padroli Drive, Harbor, Oregon. Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for letting me speak. I am a resident of Curry County. I'm also the fire chief of the Harbor Rural Fire Protection District, and I'm the current chair on the Curry County Planning Commission. What is being proposed here is that we just want a clear understanding, and I mirror what Carolyn has spoken to, and also our chairman for the CIC committee, that we feel that it's really, really imperative that when we bring all of this stuff together, that we're on the right track, and that when it does come in front of the commissioners, that it's a full package. The model that has been before has been very, very disappointing at times, that when it's presented to the commissioners, it didn't have the outcome, maybe that the effort and whatnot that went into it. And we just hope that this model would be more in preparedness for that. And we're looking for the commissioners maybe to support us to move forward with this model. On the specific issue that we're talking about is dealing with life and safety issues and property management issues. And that's one of the goals, I think, that is a responsibility of Curry County commissioners, is to support the people within the county and to be able to do it in such a way that it's understood what the main goal is. And in this case here again, I believe it's life and safety and property. It's going to drive commerce. It's going to be able to drive community expansion if we make the right things, put the right things in place at the very beginning of any of these processes, so that we minimize our liability and exposure to the residents of the county. So we know that dealing here specifically with fire-related issues is really highly important. The county had experienced this last summer the relative exposure to fire. And what we do have in the current codes and certain zoning, we want to expand that to definitely cover these identified areas. We want the commissioner and the commission to adopt the current maps that will help planning in order to be able to do this. I can speak to this directly because on these maps, not only does it involve several areas within Curry County, but it directly involves certain portions within the fire district that I have taken the oath and the responsibility for the residency within that district. So I fully support us to be able to go out to the public, use the CIC committee, other involvement with support of the commissioners for us to follow this particular type of model. If there's any questions, I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Chief.
If not, I thank you very, very much, commissioners, for allowing me to present this to you. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for all the help. Did you have anything else that you were going to add, or what?
Only if you have questions.
I have some questions. Did you have anything to add or comment, or?
Just in general, if I may, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, very briefly, I think it is a truism in local government throughout at least my entire career, dating back to the early 80s, is that when a public hearing is held at a local governmental body, city council, county commissioners, it is true that if it's at all potentially controversial or regards imposing new regulations or new requirements, almost always the people that are in opposition are more motivated to attend those meetings than the people who may be in support. And I just think, and that's not a good thing, it's not a bad thing, I think that's just the way government, local government at least, tends to operate, and has done so, I think, for many, many years. So I think there's some real benefit in taking this approach.
Yeah, would you come up, Carolyn? And I'll have a comment or question for Chief Brazil also, and test his memory. When you and I spoke, we talked about, or you'd mentioned a follow-up to me that this was because these maps, there's not really good clarity because there's so much area covered, and even the PDF file, you start to zoom in a little bit and you lose really what's there. You can't go in on a tax lot base. You can't even remotely get close to a tax lot basis. You had commented that it was, or that there is a layer on the current GIS system. Is that is that on the system that's available to the public? Because there's a public one and there's an internal.
You know, I would need to double check because I only ever use my internal drive, but.
We don't know if it's been adopted.
Yeah, we don't know if these maps,
Well,
I don't think. have been
regardless, you know, whether it has, but that much more clarity would be available.
Sure.
Because again, you can't get really anything on any detail on even on the electronic files.
Well, actually, I looked at it in our internal drive, and you can get it down by parcel and ownership.
Now, when you say you're talking about the GIS.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
In the internal,
Yeah.
in the internal drive that we use, but I want to check to see
But
if
if you
that's also
could,
available.
and give
for
us
the-
so we could even
Right.
post it, you know, as
Sure.
far as an addendum or something on the website, so that
Right.
we would
Yep.
have a link that people could go to
Sure.
to look at that layer.
Absolutely.
That'd be important.
Because, and then my question for Chief Brazil. Okay. And I had mentioned this also to Carolyn Johnson, because there were a lot of similarities from memory. And I went back into some of my records. I thought it was not as old as it was, but back in 2010, in August and September of 2010, and I'm sure you were involved and at the meetings, or I can't imagine you wouldn't have been. There was this Oregon Forest Land Urban Interface Fire Protection group that came out of Coos Bay, but they interfaced with the City of Brookings Fire Chief, and they had maps. They basically identified, and I think that's what's, to a degree, what's been done on these maps, but they were identifying on a tax lot by tax lot basis and making these decisions whether yours was high, moderate, or low, and it was very similar. Did you have a comment, or
When you're, I think after the chief speaks, I'd like Jeremy to
Oh,
speak
okay.
on that same.
And it was essentially, it was non-negotiable, but it had a lot of similarities to what this other issue that Carolyn was talking about on that other land use issue that did not go anywhere on the liquefaction, et cetera, et cetera. All of a sudden, somebody sees some detail, or did they receive a notice, and their lot is classified as higher or high risk, and all of a sudden the insurance just goes boop, the red flags go up, everything. Do you recall the discussions and the meetings on that, John? Or
I may be mistaken, Commissioner, but I believe around that time frame there was a pretty well in-depth study that was done by a college organization, and we had put together in the whole package, I think it's referred to as the Curry County Wildfire Protection Plan, CWPT. Yeah, and that had covered a lot of those elements that you specifically are addressing. Also in that particular plan, there was a lot of suggestions that we as a county should move forward to, and that was presented to the commission. And frankly, many of those were chosen not to proceed with. Or if the commission had decided to proceed with those since 2010, I'm lacking what the time frame of those responsibilities or suggestions were. But Commissioner Huxley, you're absolutely right. A lot of this was done during that time. It is a real well put together document. A lot of effort had went into that. And again, I don't really believe that the commission had accepted that.
now, when you say the commission, because I didn't recall that this had gone through a commission for approval. It was like,
It's
I mean,
kind of
each property owner affected, and there were thousands of them here in the county, was received. I have the copy of the letter I received here in September of 2012, and when it got into I attended the meetings. I went over the audios of the meeting.
well.
And it was not negotiable.
What I'm referring to, Chairman, and what I'm referring to is that there was identified suggestions for us to go forward with.
Meaning the planning commission, is that what or no?
Curry County,
Okay,
in relationship to that, to that whole document, and I don't believe some of those things had been adopted to go forward with.
maybe.
And that's kind of a loose, concern, which at some point I would like to attend another workshop, and Commissioner Boyce has been trying to assist me with that. The time frame just hasn't come up for preventative actions that I think that we as a county could do along the life safety and fire issues. Some of you are aware that I have sent various emails questioning certain things, who the members of the adopted fire management board of the county are, and when does their terms expire. I haven't got any answers back yet on that. The whole issue about Curry County is not willing to or has chosen not to become a mutual aid partner with the fire districts or CFPA within Curry County. The question about how is the county going to respond to properties and parcels or property owners within Curry County that are not covered by a fire district or within a fire district's boundary and is not within CFPA's boundary. Lately, I know that I had sent the ORS that I believe that designates that it's the Curry County responsibility, the commissioner's responsibility, or their appointee. So I only know about some things that's within Harbor Rural Fire Protection District that are unprotected properties. It's not within the fire district, but not a member of the district, but within the geographic boundaries that are not Harbor Fire's responsibility and are not CFPA's responsibility, but directly lies with Curry County. And anyway, that's a different meeting, but some of those things were brought out in 2010 in that particular document and those concerns. Where we are today is if we have public meetings, which I believe that we should have, to bring the issue that we're speaking directly to the commissioner at a later date, that we're in a position to be able to answer those specific questions prior to it getting here to a commissioner's meeting, and to have the public aware of their particular individual circumstances, positioned to try to benefit the entire county for life and safety issues.
Please get some comments, because then I want to go back with further what my understanding is and why I'm so concerned if there's a relationship here.
Good morning, Commissioners. Jeremy Dumeyer, Curry County Emergency Services. What you're referring to, Commissioner Huxley, is Senate Bill 360.
Correct.
Senate Bill 360 was basically, you had 4 homes in a 40-acre parcel, that those homes were in an urban interface environment and were in need of extra protection from fire. Firewise was a big push at that time. In fact, I was a Firewise forester during that time in 2010. There were requirements, but there was not enough teeth to fulfill those requirements. Part of what this resolution has, I've reviewed, kind of gives the planning department the teeth to actually enforce Firewise type principles throughout the county and throughout these areas in particular. I see this entire process as being extremely beneficial for the county. But you're correct, there's a state program, Senate Bill 360, that was implemented in 2010.
While you're still up here, and this is why I'm concerned, we're very concerned, because, and there's also, and I have the electronic version, and I can get that to Carolyn, to pass it around. But this was a 32-page, and in this document and in this discussions that they had at this open meeting, it was down at the Best Western in Harbor. They went so far, in writing, to say that if it's not negotiable. Now, it may not. You say it may not have teeth, but it's a standing Senate bill that if you didn't do this and this and this around your property, and a fire started on your property, that this gave them the power to go back after you as an individual property owner.
Correct.
For the first $100,000, and it was not negotiable. It was said just like that. So that's why I'm very concerned. Where are we going? Where is this going? And what is the interface with what we're doing here? Because it was dictatorial, is what it was. It was.
Well, you're correct in your memory, but again, that was only for parcels within a 4-house per 40-acre area. And I still actually have the Senate Bill 360 maps that show, at least in 2010 terms, how developed areas were, such as, say, Cape Farello, where that really does fall within a very condensed wildland urban interface environment. I think more so with what this plan here that Ms. Johnson's bringing for you identifies areas that are actually outside of the Senate Bill 360 requirements. You know, you might have a house, say, in the middle of Ophir that is on its own. There's no other houses around it for 100 acres. That house alone does not fall within Senate Bill 360 because it's not defined as being within the 4 houses per 40 acres. So with this plan that they're bringing forth, a house being built out in the area I see on the map of Agnes, for instance, and it's outside of that Senate Bill 360 jurisdiction, then the Planning Commission at least has the similar write-up to go and say, okay, you need to follow these principles, and here's the enforcement as well. So it's similar to your memory, but it better covers the county in total.
Okay. I'll look further because you're on your 4 houses per 40 acres. Like again, I received an individual letter, as did I think everybody at this meeting.
There were 3,000 mailings in Curry County at the
time. And there's clearly within 40 acres of where I am, many, many, many more houses than 4 within that 40 acres.
Yeah, it's within. It's outside of city limits, outside, I believe it's within 1/8 of a mile of city limits. And it is in an area identified as being within the urban interface, essentially. Most areas in Curry County, most populated areas such as, say, North Bank of the Checo, Harbor Hills, Cape Ferrello, certain areas of the Windchuck, Pisco River, there's plenty of areas in this county that are within that designation of Senate Bill 360. But
South Bay.
there are certainly places that are well outside of. In fact, I can think of 2 offhand that are neighbors, but they are the only houses off the grid. And because they're so far from anyone else, they don't qualify under Senate Bill 360. So again, and they would be actually included in this map as it is. So I recall it very well. Like I said, I was a Firewise Forester in charge of Senate Bill 360 regulations here in Curry County from 2010 to 2012. So your memory's correct, but it doesn't encompass the entire county. It's just those areas within the defined wildland urban interface within so many houses per area.
And that I understand, but again, my concern was personal, clearly, because I was one of the ones that was told if this occurred, I would be responsible, as everybody else in that whole area, basically on the Harbor Hills.
Yeah.
On it. And $100,000 does get your attention.
Yes, it does.
When they say they have the teeth to go back and lien your property, and they've already had the legislation in place to do that. And that's the way it came across.
Yeah, on that, one of the things that I came across in my time as a firefighter here in the county, and it still to this day exists, I know I've talked with the chief, I've talked with the Brookings firefighters as well, that there's areas that they just don't bother. In fact, I remember specifically going to a house to do a burn barrel permit back when that was allowed. And my fire truck was a 1-ton dually Ford truck with a 200-gallon tank on the back. So a typical truck, if you will. The house I recall at this moment was within Cape Ferrello's district, was so overgrown that my mirrors were touching brush on both sides, and all I could see of the house was the front door. Needless to say, you didn't get burn barrel permit. But that was not an anomaly. There are many places that are so overgrown or so difficult to access for fire. Even bringing my truck in, again, a 1-ton pickup, and having to worry about the light bar being ripped off the top as I'm going into the driveway, let alone a Type 1 structure fire truck, as I know they had issues this year up, say, Gardner Ridge. So again, this is something I believe is very beneficial for the county as a whole for life and safety.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. Any other questions on this topic, or Administrator Hitt?
Well, one comment, one question. A question for you, Commissioner, is since I've never seen that letter, Would you describe the conditions or the requirements to exempt yourself from a potential $100,000 liability? Would you consider them onerous, or?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So more than just like clearing brush?
Oh,
or-
they got into so many feet. It was
Okay.
a monumental, you know, and I say I only have an acre, but yeah, from my perspective, it was
Okay.
monumental.
Okay. Well, I remember we had that same proposal when I was in Lebanon in 2010, and in our case, we adopted it for the unincorporated urban growth boundary, in which in Lebanon's case is a fairly good sized area. And I don't, you know, it's kind of funny because I don't recall anyone really strenuously objecting to that requirement. Again, wasn't people already
Again, it was
incorporated?
not negotiable.
Yeah, no, and we didn't make it negotiable.
Yeah,
We just,
yeah.
we had the proposal, just like you did, and we had a couple of public hearings about it and then adopted it.
Clearly, we went out to a lot of
But-
people. You'd mentioned 3,000 or
Yeah.
3,000 plus notices,
Yeah.
so then that was just in.
Yeah, and we wouldn't have had 3,000,
It was a lot of
yeah, not in
people.
our living residents in our unincorporated urban growth boundary. I'm gonna get, if I had to guess, that number would probably be more like 500 or 600, but yeah, anyway, just interesting.
Commissioner Boyce?
Yeah, just even without the fire, it's hard to find in the issues that we're facing in this county, it's hard to find one more important than this. So anything we do that gently or politely rings the bell for the public awareness, meetings, what we're doing today, it's the ground fuels, as everyone knows, that we have in this county is just a lightning rod for another possible fire. So anything and everything we do is gonna help. And so I'm just ready to move forward, support this, and including adopting the maps if that's part of what we need to do to help you. All the above, and just commend the good work and all of you that are involved, and let's do everything we can to again help the public understand the risk we have here. When you look around California right now, we have just as much or greater sources of fuel than they do.
So to Carolyn Johnson, what are you asking for?
Well, what I'd like to learn
This morning.
is whether or not the board supports this public outreach approach. Because if there's not support, I need to step back and see if or how I can get it to the board with people being more educated, or pull back altogether. If the board is not supportive of this, I need to go back and I need to give this some further thought. Again, we're talking simply about a process that we'd like to move forward on. Not asking you today to adopt anything, but we don't want to go to the expense and the time to reach out to folks if the board isn't supportive of that approach, that outreach approach.
So I'm not going to speak for Commissioner Boyce, but I certainly think he's, you know, for this outreach approach. I am for the outreach, but I would still like to have you look into this further.
Sure.
What I've raised for some clarity, because if you think that you had issues on the last issue with the liquefaction, and if as an outcome of this outreach or these maps, everyone that doesn't even know what they're classified on these maps all of a sudden starts getting noticed, you would have as many, if not more,
Certainly.
public, you know, concern than you had on that liquefaction, I think.
It might help to share kind of what we anticipate in these public meetings, and I haven't really gone over this with the committee yet, but I would anticipate that we would have a computer there. We would identify parcels. People could look to see where they lived, and if if they were in a moderate area or a high area, we would walk through these requirements with them and get their feedback. If they had questions about how this would affect their insurance, that would give them time to vet that out with their agents. I just think it's a much more measured approach than just coming to you in a few weeks and saying, here it is. Because when folks get that notice in the mail, and it's required here in Oregon that you have to say, we're looking at a zoning change and it could affect your property values, they, rightly so, can be alarmed. And I don't want that. I don't think it's our...
Have you, on the GIS, because I think it allows you to do that now, have you drawn out circles or squares or rectangles to get an idea of just how many, based on these maps,
I think
how many people would...
I think we're looking at 2,000 to 3,000.
Guess not as many as
Yeah,
I
no,
would
it's
have
not as
thought.
many.
Okay.
But, yeah, and remember too, that also includes areas that are already in the forest grazing zone that already have these requirements.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be even less than that.
County Council?
Well, thanks. And Carolyn, I think I've got property in the timber zone, and I'm almost familiar with some of these requirements. I think Jeremy touched on them a little bit when he said there was brush touching the side of his mirrors. What are, you know, some of those requirements? I know we
Sure.
don't have the text of the ordinance. It wasn't in the packet I got. Maybe it's in a supplemental or something. But what are really we talking about? You know,
I think
recommending? Is there, you know,
sure.
Go ahead.
I mentioned that at the beginning of,
You're right. You
my
mentioned
presentation.
the water supply,
But first-
defensible space,
Defensible
roads or something.
space. I purposely did not bring you the draft
Yep.
because I do not want you to feel, I don't want there appearance to be any appearance of prejudice because you've
Sure.
seen it before the public has gone through the outreach process. And I don't want them to feel like I circumvented that. But I can read to you from what we already require in the forest grazing zone, and this is section 3.055 of the Curry County zoning ordinance. One of the things is that if you are in a fire protection district, the fire protection district has to identify how you will be complying with their requirements. If you're going to need a certain amount of water on the site that holds at least 4,000 gallons, or a stream that has continuous year-round flow, and this is already in the code for forest grazing and timber. You have to have a primary safety area of at least 30 feet around all structures. It identifies how high the grass can be. You have to have a secondary area of at least 100 feet around the primary fire safety area, so that's 130 feet around the safety area. You have to have a fire retardant roof. If you have a chimney, each has to have a spark arrestor. You cannot be on a slope that is over 40% in slope. Additionally, it says that the county can impose additional standards if after we review this and the fire district reviews it, that says we need even more standards than what you have in your code. You have to have adequate road access to the dwellings. You have to have a drivable surface of at least 16 feet. It has to have an all-weather drivable surface of gravel or rock. You have to have unobstructed horizontal clearance of not less than 16 feet and an unobstructed vertical clearance of not less than 12 feet. So that would address kind of what Jeremy ran into in the house that he referenced. It identifies the average grade for the roadway not to exceed 13.5% for any 1 mile in road length or exceed 20% for any 400 consecutive feet of road length. So if you're on those private roads and driveways that, you know, are very long, there's a standard for that. It identifies a requirement for a turnaround. If you have, for firefighting equipment, it identifies maintenance of culverts, driveways, and bridges so that you can support a gross weight of 50,000 pounds for fire vehicles. These have to be signed off on by a professional engineer. Bridges have to be inspected by that engineer to make sure they comply with that standard. And if you want a variation from any of those standards, you have to get a variance. You have to go through a whole nother process to get a variance. So I think they're pretty, I think they encompass a lot of what, you know, I've been told that the fire professionals in our area really want to see in these
And
high-risk areas.
there's no provision that anyone be responsible for
No.
$100,000 worth of fire damage for violating our code or anything like that.
No, I'm wild guess that might be a civil issue between neighbors, but that would not be something the county would be responsible for.
Did you say 30.0, excuse me, 30.055, was that the number you?
30.055, and that is for the forest grazing zone. I don't have the one for the timber zone with me.
Pretty similar though.
It's
not the same.
almost
Yeah.
it is the same, yeah. And what is in the regs for this area is, it's just practically the same as all of this. There's a few tweaks, but it's nearly the same, so.
Administrator Hitt.
A couple of questions, Carolyn. I haven't read that particular section of the code. Is this for permits for new structures?
Yes,
Okay, so if
Yes.
somebody already had a home on
and,
well, in additions,
well,
yeah.
additions over 50%.
Yeah, okay,
of-
that's
yeah.
kind of standard, yeah. Just a comment, again, what you read to me is, not unusual in my experience. And so I don't think what's already in the code, at least for that particular zone, is exceptional or particularly, again, in my experience, remarkable.
Thank you.
Chief Brazil.
Oh, Chief Brazil.
Yeah, Commissioners, let me address that just a little bit. For the interim county administrator, what Carolyn had spoke to in our county, in between our road department, our zoning requirements, the building department, different cities established within the county, some of those requirements were kind of different in many, many locations within our county. Don't quote me, but hypothetically, let's say that if you were in the South County, the height on road clearance accessing a dwelling may have been 10 feet. If you were in Port Orford, maybe the height was 17 feet or whatever. So a lot of work went into trying to establish something that met the intent for whatever that requirement was, and kind of try to standardize that throughout the entire county so that property owners or builders or purchasers or whatever would kind of be looking at the same requirements. And that's partly what we're trying to do here. Okay. From a fire agency response, at times, one of the things that we address is bridges. And one of the requirements that's in for bridges is that they are inspected at a periodic time. That inspection goes to the county. It's a county requirement. What I found in my history is that, and I can probably go back, but I've asked the county before, who do I see and what's the history on accepting these bridge inspections? And frankly, I get no response. Don't know. So we have a requirement. We have it in place. One of the things that really bothers me is that we don't follow through with those requirements or what the consequences are. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm responding with an 80,000-pound vehicle. I've got volunteer firefighters manning that. I come to a bridge that I have no clue, and I tell my guys, respond to that, to go try to pull somebody out of a burning structure, and the bridge fails. I'm not going to be on the court stand saying, oh, by the way, I had no idea if that bridge was good or not. Oh, by the way, I didn't check with the county to see what the records were. Oh, by the way, I just told the guys, just go for it. From a life safety point of view, I do not like to be in that position. So I guess what I'm summing up on this is to try to make it a little more easier for us in the county to keep records and to maintain standards. If we happen to adopt a standard of a road clearance of 12 feet throughout all of our zoning, we only have one requirement to try to match. not say, oh, it's 16 feet here or 12 feet there or whatever. So that is part of this goal. Yes, we want to have the opportunity to come in front of the public, have public input for whatever their concerns may be. This may affect your property value. First thing that comes to seems like most people's minds is that it's going to make my property value go down. This may affect your property value. It may increase your property value. So why always take that negative approach? And that, by having public meetings of this and following this model, I think will give us that opportunity. By putting something in place that is common throughout the whole county, we can talk on the same level plane as far as how does this affect your ISO rating for your fire department? How does that attribute to what you're going to pay for insurance? What is the response time to know that you have this kind of life safety access in Curry County? I'm going to build something. I'm going to put a business in. I'm going to drive commerce, or I'm going to move to a location. If I know that this county is supporting life and safety issues, driving insurance costs down, improving access time for emergency situations, it might be the place that I want to go to drive additional commerce. So from a community investment, from commerce, and from doing what I believe is our part, providing public life and safety to our community and our county and minimize our exposure to liability, I think this is a step forward to support this model. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Jeremy, do you have another comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to
Please
touch on what we were talking about earlier. Again, Jeremy Dumeyer. Talking about Senate Bill 360 and how it correlates, and going back to the conversation I had, Oregon Revised Statutes 477.057 and Oregon Revised Statutes 477.059. In 059, paragraph 6, again, specifically to your comment, the owner of land designated to be within the forest land urban interface is liable to the state forester for the cost of suppressing a fire that occurs on that land, as described in subsection 7. If the owner failed to meet applicable minimum standards established under the section, fire originates on the land. The ignition or spread of the fire is directly related to the owner failing to meet applicable minimum standards. In section 7, the liability of an owner of the land under subsection 6 of this section may not exceed $100,000. So specifically on the Senate Bill 360, that's referenced. And if you look at the text of 477, 057, and 059, again, they parrot what this ordinance would be, which just establishes the countywide, basically fire protection, if you will, as far as for homeowner responsibilities in building out in the wildland urban interface. I also want to point out that in 057, the state forester is to classify land if the county fails to act. And that is listed in this ORS as well. So again, these actions that are being taken are quite necessary, in my opinion, for the overall benefit of the county citizens.
Thank you. Before we close on this, and I think I know what the answer to the question is, but I see the roadmaster. Doug, could you come up just so I could ask a question on the issue that the fire Chief Brazil brought on the bridges? If something's on private property, you know, a bridge, you don't have any mapping on anything like that, do you?
No.
I didn't think so, but I just wasn't sure, which just complicates it more.
Right.
You know,
It
as far
does.
as you know, a list, even a list.
Yeah, that,
Okay.
we keep that separate with planning and, you know, we got our stuff, they got theirs. and
Okay.
Private's on their side.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
If I could follow up on that, I've searched for records on bridges and private roads and to no avail. If I think that might be a topic for another day to discuss if or how all of those could be inventoried. It would be at some cost and at either staff or contract staff resource that would also be at a cost.
Well, that and
So-
culverts was another one.
Yes.
You know, where there've been washouts, and it was just,
Yes.
we're not talking about just a few dozen. We're
So-
talking probably about thousands,
Yeah.
of, you know, in the culverts alone.
Yeah. So
Okay.
that's the
okay.
status.
Okay, thank you. We have any other comments on this topic? Ben? So I think we have, you know, to your request, consensus to certainly pursue going to the approach that you're talking about, to look at that further.
Okay. I'll be regrouping with the committee and Jeremy and the chief, and I'll be getting back with
Okay.
Mr. Hitt about scheduling and then ultimately going on to the board.
With
Just
work-
so,
But with the workshop
yes.
scenario, okay.
So you know, because I have to notify everybody and their brother in one of these areas with a Measure 56 notice of a potential zoning change, I will be including the workshop dates in it, on those notices. Otherwise, I have no way, I'm not going to repeat this. This is $4,000 to $5,000 cost to do these notices. So if you are contacted about this effort, I just want to give you the heads up that you know, that what's happening and that we will have these. So Mr. Hitt and I'll get that information to you as soon as we set those dates.
So before you even set a date, though, then, am I understanding correctly that you will have to send these notices out just for workshops, or are you trying to get them
Well, I
out?
fully intend to.
Okay.
I'm going to
I
send
just-
them
Yeah,
identifying the
okay.
workshop dates and the public hearing date. Because
Okay.
I don't want to have to send out a second notice.
You just answered my question.
yeah.
Thank you.
So,
And,
Commissioner Boyce?
and you have that within your budget?
I'm going to go over budget. I'll be honest with you. I'm going to end up going over budget for that. So Mr. Hitt and I will have to talk about that.
I just would like to have an opportunity to work with you and Administrator Hitt on this, and just, there's a tremendous learning process opportunity here, and the more we know, the more we can offer the public, and Curry County in this sense, geographically, is pretty big.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks.
There are some potential grant opportunities for things like mailings, believe it or not, that I'm pursuing on a different piece of the zoning code. And if we can figure out a way to do it for this one, we'll push. Okay?
Thank you.
Well, do you have a structure for the public hearings yet? I might have missed that. You might be.
Oh, you mean for the
considering-
workshops?
Yes. You said workshops. Okay.
I'm kind of anticipating a situation where we have a presentation by one of the committee members and myself, and maybe mostly the committee members. I'm really going to lean on them for the outreach. I'll be at all the meetings, but I'm anticipating tabletop sessions where people can get together, talk, and then each table would have somebody get up and pose their questions. Or there's just some other interesting interactive methods that we'll use, and I'll keep you all posted on that.
Okay, thank
as we
you.
go along. Thank you.
Okay, let's move to what was still shown as agenda item 3, road fund loans, and that's for Administrator Hitt.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Boyce, you have as part of your packet a memo, actually 2 memos. One is dated for November 8th, 2017, that gave kind of the background of House Bill 3435 and what that bill authorized. Then a more recent memo dated for today, December 13th. In addition, attached to this is a conceptual policy guidelines for lending. And as my memo notes, this is submitted only as a starting point. So as I put together the conceptual policy guidelines for possibly setting up Curry County Road Fund loans to other government entities, There were many factors I wanted to consider, so I will briefly highlight some of them that are on that conceptual policy guideline. So number 2 there is consistent with what the law requires, is as a minimum, no loan defaults in the prior 5 fiscal years for anybody seeking or wanting county a loan from the county road fund. Number 3 is the public entity requesting a loan must qualify for an independently certified bond rating, and that gives some bond ratings. Those are all considered investment quality bond ratings, which are also mentioned in ORS 394, as well as 2 other documents, which I'll refer to in a minute. Number 5, any road fund granted must be secured by the general obligation of the borrowing entity. What this means is, if it's a general obligation requirement, then the governmental entity must give priority or first precedence in the case of any revenue shortfalls or other issues to the general obligation requirements. Number 6, and this is kind of, in my career, I've been involved in quite a few municipal bond issues and refinances, and it's fairly common for the underwriting agency to require tax revenue in excess of 125% of the total debt service required. So in other words, the borrowing entity must show, A, we can pay the by their current tax revenues, because it's, again, a general obligation bond, it's not a revenue bond. So they must show from their tax revenues that they have unobligated tax revenues in excess of 125% of the anticipated annual debt service to fully service that loan. Again, that's not an unusual requirement, so that's why I put it in there. Number 7 says the road cannot lend more than 5% of the total road fund to any one particular entity, or the lesser of 5% or $2 million. Number 8 is similar to that, except that it says all governmental entity loans combined may not exceed the lesser of 35% or $12 million. Then on the back side, number 11, talking about loan terms, it says no individual loan shall exceed a term of more than 5 years, which could be renewed for another 5 years obviously if the board approved at the time, as well as certain other conditions being met. And number 12, again, a common requirement for a new municipal bond issue is to a loan fund, cash reserve fund to be set aside, sometimes called a sinking fund, but a separate escrow accounted fund, in this case proposing at least 7.5% of the amount borrowed. In my experience, it can be as little as 2 or 3% or as high as 10%. So what I try to do in coming up with these requirements is blend several different requirements and or recommendations. The first of these comes from ORS 294, which says one of the options for local investment in Section B is lawfully issued debt obligations of the agencies and instrumentalities of the state of Oregon and its political subdivisions. That same section a little further on says if it's a loan to a particular entity, in this case a corporate entity, that loan cannot exceed, or investment, excuse me, cannot exceed more than 35% of that, of the total money, investable money, and not all loans combined, and not more than 5% to any one local governmental entity. And then I also used as a guideline here the Oregon Investment Council policy short-term investment portfolio rules, and those rules differ a little bit from what I just read in 294. They allow municipal debt total of 25%, so I went a little higher than that, 35, but it says per issuer they allow up to 10%. Then also I used Oregon Local Government Intermediate Fund Investment Guidelines, which says maturity, that the maximum stated maturity should not be greater than 10.25 years. And and it goes on to issue or talk about other requirements similar to what we've had, or what's already been discussed. So basically what I came up with, and again, every one of these points could be moved either more strict or more limited, or less strict or less limited. And I think, so there's room to maneuver here with these three separate guidelines in mind. There's room to maneuver as far as terms, as far as the amount to be to offer to lend, either for one loan or for all loans put together. And that's again assuming that this is even a direction the board wants to go. So it may be wise to postpone if your direction to staff is to bring this back. If your direction to staff is not to bring it back, then obviously we're done and that's it. But if your direction to staff is to bring back these matters again, particularly when Commissioner Sue Gold can be here, then would probably doesn't, unless you have particular questions or comments, probably doesn't benefit a detailed discussion, or detailed discussion may not be justified at this point. Again, unless your direction to staff is you just don't want to consider this further. So, barring questions, that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Boyce?
Thank you. Yes, I think it'd be beneficial to have Commissioner Gold informed on this. If we could bring it back at a later date. Your policy guideline on number 1, the requested loan meet a clear and compelling public need or benefit, and then we go into 12 points. So I'm concerned that if we have interest in possibly pursuing this and having it available to the county or a future board, the work hopefully that we're doing won't go wasted. But I think a taxing district demonstrating a good public need or benefit might look at this and be overwhelmed by that many guidelines and the detail of those guidelines. And I don't think that's the purpose when we're trying to solve problems. It could be detrimental in that sense. So yeah, I think I would be in favor of postponing. I think you had an option there of perhaps a January 18th meeting.
Well, we could either put it for, I think it's January 17th meeting, or we could schedule it for another workshop for, again, more detailed discussion with Commissioner Gold, or just go ahead and agendize it for one of our regular meetings.
Let's put it on the 17th agenda. That would, and I'm pretty sure she'll be back by then.
I would prefer to have another workshop. I think there's much more to this. I also have a couple of documents I want to enter into the record, a memo to the commissioners and to yourself and county council. And with my recommendation, with this in mind, with correspondence, with news articles, etc. But I don't think we're anywhere near, especially with 2, because even if this was a meeting, it's a workshop, but even there we can't really give direction reasonably, because if either Commissioner Boyce or myself were not in total agreement, that would go down only because, not because perhaps a majority of the board, were they present, but because with 2, it's either unanimous or
it doesn't happen.
You have two in the yes, or it doesn't happen in a workshop or in any meeting, not just a workshop, in a public meeting also. That's just the way it is with the voting. So I would far prefer to have another workshop to be scheduled in the future, and to seeing where Commissioner Gold is on coming back. And what's expected, Administrator Head?
I believe her plans are to be ready to return approximately January 5th. And I tentatively thought we, based on some of the things that are coming up in January and February, to do a workshop January 10th. So we could schedule this, if the two of you are in agreement, for a workshop on January 10th.
Agreed.
Okay. Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Thank you.
Will Commissioner Gold be back then?
That's what he just said.
I believe, yes. She,
Yeah, he led.
the last information I received from her, she'd be back around the 4th or 5th.
So let me just.
Oh, I'm sorry, John?
Workshop January 10th for sure.
Well, I believe that's
So
what
we
I
agreed
heard.
to.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So, schedule. Workshop for Wednesday. Okay, I just then will enter this memo and attachment into the record and request that it be put in as a supplemental on the website.
Mhm.
This would be a copy for
Thank you.
you. This would be one for you, one for county council.
Thank you.
And then this one would be to pass to John Jesuit. Thank you. And again, the crux of my memo is it relates to some letters or forums, but basically on this subject, and that it be in the form of an ordinance, and I think that's what your
Yes.
purpose or proposal is here, regardless of how many points there are, but that ordinance be referred to the people for a vote, and that's where there's a difference in my, recommendation or position. But I think also that any of these, and I believe there are 50 now taxing districts in the county, that all these taxing districts are held to pretty much all of these standards, as far as conducting their business, and certainly if they were to go out for any possible loan or in a larger amount for issuance of a bond, a municipal bond, they're going to be held to this and more. I think 1.2, and we have the accountant here, you'd mentioned 35%. I think there's been a lot of reference to 30 million or 31 or 32 or 33 million, but all of that is not available for just anything. When you look at the revenue expense monthly reports, I think there's approximately 21 or 22 million that doesn't have some type of encumbrance, in many cases, by the road department for possible use within any budget year for a bridge issue or something else. So it's not that there would be a total of 30, it's for round numbers, of 30 million available. And those are my comments. So, Commissioner Boyce?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just getting the sense that this is probably not something, just in the interest of time and money, staff time, that's probably not something that we're going to be able to agree on, and it may be that it is potentially so complicated that we're not really gaining something here that is likely to be available. If we postponed it and we had a taxing district come to us with a demonstrated need and a good plan and a good proposal, then maybe we could act then in the interest of time. That might be one option. But I just have the concern that we might spend a lot of additional time on this, and maybe it isn't going to be successful with the board. Maybe I'm wrong.
I can't speak you know, I can only speak for my opinions and reasons for my opinions. I certainly can't speak for you nor Commissioner Gold, so I don't know that I can say that. It takes.
You mentioned unless we agree.
Well,
and
unless.
so maybe we
well,
can
no,
come
but,
to, maybe we'll have that
but
opportunity.
I mentioned because of two, that it wouldn't be appropriate, I didn't think, to make any give direction necessarily, because unless there was, both were in agreement, or in a general meeting, if there are only two and both are not in agreement, it goes down, whatever the issue would be.
I appreciate that clarification. Thank you.
But I think that to say that possibly not do anything further now, but if somebody comes, or if a tax district comes to the county with this, then we're going to be doing it, and I think that would be reactive versus proactive is what we're talking about here. Setting the groundwork to, is it viable, and would the county be in agreement so that if somebody did in the future come, all of that work has already been done, so that they know before they even come to the county what the requirements would be. So I think it would behoove us to pursue to that point.
I would agree.
Then I'll support the 110, remain supportive of the 110 workshop,
Okay.
2018.
Okay. Any other comments on this subject? No? Okay, so let's go to the public records request policy, which is shown here as agenda item 4. That was that Administrator Hitt also?
Mm-hmm.
Administrator Hitt, Jim.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Boyce. You have, just as a reminder, we had a workshop discussion on this on November 15th, and then there were several requests for clarification of that prior draft, as well as making sure that the new draft included the new timeline requirements that I believe go into effect January 1st. So what you have are 2 more drafts. They're pretty similar. Draft number 3, red title at the top, as well as draft number 4. Draft number 3 includes the basic requirements of both those drafts are the same. But draft number 4 is a little more abbreviated, takes out some of the kind of general public information, as well as some maybe additional information that might be beneficial to staff. You also have the current public records request policy and procedure. What the new, and just looking for now at draft 4, it kind of clarifies some things in the sense of a process, requires the appointment of a public records custodian, then identifies public record request as simple or standard. Simple public request are those requests where someone may come into any office of the county. They might come into the veterans office, they might come into the county clerk, county assessor, request some document or some piece of information that is readily accessible by that staff person. So that staff person at that time then can make copy or copies if they feel it's appropriate to charge a 25 cents per page copy fee. They're certainly empowered to do so. Give that or refer to where the documents information can be readily accessed, for example, on the website or perhaps other locations. And then basically that process then is done. We've met the desired request. We haven't spent a lot of time. It mentions not spending roughly more than 5 minutes of staff time to address that need in section 4A there. It refers to that. If the request, regardless of where it comes in, now obviously if it comes in by mail or by the website, it's going to come directly to me, or if I designate a separate person to be the public records custodian. That will come directly to the public records custodian. Again, if it's a walk-in, somebody coming in, hey, to a different office, hey, I want some documents. The person, just pick on the county assessor here because they have a lot of walk-ins. County assessor person at the counter says, gee, I have no idea where that information is. I'm not sure. It looks like it might take, I can't address your needs in even close to 5 minutes. And that person would request the person seeking the information fill out a public records request form. I left it kind of voluntary, as kind of up to the person there at the counter or the public records custodian as to whether they would require or request a $25 deposit. Again, kind of depends on circumstances. And then, then from that point on, you have here part 4, and this needs to be reformatted here, but because we have 2 A's, apologize for that. But it says processing the request. So it details the responsibilities of the public records custodian to review the request. If it looks like it may be involved in a lawsuit or other questionable legal matters, go directly to the county council. If not, then coordinate with the different departments. So it looks like that's a clerk thing, or it looks like it's an assessor document, police, sheriff's document, whatever it may be. And each department would then appoint a public records manager that would be responsible for responding to the custodian when they pass on the request. And then once the custodian has determined that we have the documents or we don't have the documents, then the custodian would respond with it's part of your attachment here. It's Exhibit B, Curry County Public Records Request Acknowledgement Form. So in that acknowledgement, A, we'd acknowledge either A, yes, we have the documents, or B, no, we don't. I mean, there's other categories there, but that's the 2 basic ones. And then if we do have the documents, an estimate, kind of a minimum estimate, maximum estimate, sometimes it's hard to know in advance exactly what it might be, to acquire the requested documents. There are time frames that are in here. We have 5 days to respond initially to send out this acknowledgement, 5 business days, and then 10 business days to provide the documents by the ORS. That's included in this draft. And then, of course, the public records custodian then would submit to county council as the last step, a legal review, making sure we weren't releasing any confidential material, do any necessary redaction, and then provide the documents as per requested. This also has, as along with the new ORS, a statement in here. It's section well, I'm not going to be able to find it. But there's a section in here saying if the acknowledgement form is sent out and saying we do have the records you request, here's the approximate estimated fee, minimum, maximum, and then there's no response. The person doesn't either pay the fee or otherwise respond to the acknowledgement. After 60 days, the whole matter is extinguished. Again,
F2.
F2, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, thank you. So that again is another addition to the ORS. So that's included in here. So my own personal take, I think either draft 3 or 4 are fine. I probably are okay. I don't have a strong preference. I think just for the sake of brevity, maybe draft 4 is a little better. Obviously, though, of course, you may have other interest in making other changes or seeing perhaps some redrafting of what's already in your draft. That's all I have.
Did you take all that in like I didn't?
Yeah. Okay, you want me to repeat all that?
Good point. You referenced a new, or did I hear you say, and I don't want to put you on the spot because I'm not familiar with it, but in AOC, they have referenced some new laws that came through the last legislature.
Yes.
That they are
These are in here.
good.
Yeah.
And so that's incorporated, and I assume
It
they
is.
were.
Yeah.
So AOC is a good resource for you if you haven't already been there. They just within, I've got info for you here, but just within their own organization on public information requests, and they're trying to, of course, incorporate, as a lot of counties and cities and responsible entities are. So anyway, I have that for you, and But yeah, it's not uncomplicated, is it?
No, it really isn't. I realize there's a fair bit of words here, although I might add the current draft for, not counting attachments, is 2¼ pages long. The current policy is, again, not counting attachments, is 4¼ pages long. So we actually reduced the number of words, amount of material.
Good job.
Obviously, anything can be simplified even further and further. The drawback of simplifying it at least a significant amount more is that information that I think the public would find useful, as well as staff find useful, maybe not necessary, but useful, would have to then be eliminated. So even though I'm a firm believer in making things as simple and as streamlined as possible, in this particular case, I would argue a little bit in favor of a little bit more information for the sake, again, of the public who may not be aware of some of this information, like ability to appeal, for example, to the district attorney that's in here. I did look at some public records policies from some other entities in the county. They usually don't include information like that, but I think that is good information, again, for the public, and there's also some additional information in here for staff. Now, what this public records policy does encompass is a certain amount of staff training. And if you well, it has to be when. You have to make some changes, as I noted in my memo. So when you make the final or adopt the final ordinance or policy order, then we will engage in some training of staff to make sure, A, they understand the new policy, and B, that they're knowledgeable of how best to proceed between the difference of somebody just walking through the door and asking for something that's readily attainable versus more complex, more drawn out type of requests.
Any other comments? Or thank you again. Just two quick ones. Would you do the staff training?
Yes, I would.
Okay. And the second question, and I don't pretend to really answer this. Do we have an urgency here? I mean, are we getting daily, weekly, monthly requests?
No. One of the things too that I try.
I'm just looking at the expense and now your staff time and your workload. Certainly your workload. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here and wondering to what degree we can, encourage and support this, and again, just the workload for you.
Well,
County Council. Excuse me.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to help answer your question about the urgency. I've been here since January 2016. Review and revising our public record policy was one of the first topics of discussion at the first management meeting I went to 2 years ago. I know there is, I don't think urgency is the right word. But there is a strong desire on the part of the county staff, from the clerk's office to county administration to legal, to have this policy redone, because even though we don't get very many of these, every time we get one, it's very cumbersome and it's very difficult. And I think there will be benefit to fixing the policy to streamline the response process, which right now it's confusing for the public. So I think there is a need. The urgency of it, I think it's being handled appropriately, but I also think with the new county administrator position being established and the powers and duties of that position, I think having this policy revised to reflect the existence of that position and the role of that position is also in order. So this is as urgent as any of the other policy changes we're making to acknowledge the existence of the county administrator. So they're all fairly urgent on that respect. There's not a court deadline or anything else, but it's a needed change, and there's called a low level of urgency, Commissioners.
Well said.
And okay, and Administrator Hitt, is that also, maybe I give you a little more background of the past history of this, but you've been to the management meetings where they've also been expressing support for this as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, we have reviewed both the prior redraft, initial draft that was discussed November 15th, as well as these two drafts for comments, suggestions, and I have gotten a few, and they've been incorporated in this most recent draft.
Now it's my turn. I'm not in disagreement with what County Council's comments are, but I think I have so many comments here. This is just one page, okay? That I don't think it would be constructive to do it during this meeting, but rather, you know, a separate, to sit down with at least Administrator Hitt, possibly County Council also, and give my comments at that point.
That would be fine.
I don't think it went in the right direction. He just, as a quick point, you know, we went from section 4 to section 8. There's no section 5, 6, or 7, and it just went on and on.
Well,
on with questions that I had and ambiguities should normally or equivalent, and trying to follow it. I think it moved away from what I hope it ultimately will be, from being incorporated in the legal office, and it went from how many actual public record custodian, we reference singular, and then it morphs into, well, is it really singular? And then we get into custodians, plural, and then we get into public record managers, implied to me for each and every, could be for each department, and it just was I just don't think it's a good way to go. That's my reaction here. But again, I would like to be very specific, item by item, but I could spend the next hour, honestly, going through item by item and why. Did you also, and I think you did, I didn't print everything out, did you include the original policy also?
Yes, I did.
Okay, I thought you did,
Yes.
because I have then just one thing that I want to enter into the record again, and a copy for Commissioner Boyce, Administrator Hitt, County Council Huddle. And yes, it has gone back. These were suggested drafts, comments when we were asked back in 2015. This is the list that I put together, dated December 4th, 2015. Aside from a few changes that are minor, that have been included, as far as perhaps times, to respond to certain things. Most of the things are still remain the same as far as the public records meeting, the manual, the statutes. So there are just a few things I think that have changed there, and there are aside from incorporation of an administrator, which certainly I think needs to change. I just think it's overwhelming in my opinion, and so I just like to leave it at that. Give a copy to, and then set up a time when we can sit down. I think also, and it was by chance that I spoke just a few days ago in passing to an individual who's had a records request in on, and with legal review or what have you, and commented, it's going on 8 weeks and they still didn't have the records. And I'm thinking, well, something's terribly, terribly wrong. And I think County Council mentioned, though, that while there aren't that many requests, the few that do come in can take an inordinate amount of time, and that's what we have to try and stop. And I know it can be eliminated. It has to be. So here's again, that's from 2015, one for Commissioner Boyce and Council Huddle, and then
Or
I have,
John Jesuit?
here's one for John. Same,
Oh.
it's the same one,
All
I
right.
just put his
Okay.
name on it, so I'd be sure, and if that could be also entered into the record and included as a supplemental item. Those are my comments. So I would, with that said, back to Administrator Hitt, how would you like to approach this from here?
Well, I don't know what Councilor Huddle would say in his comments. You know, I'm not sure. I'm happy to meet with you anytime. Happy to
I
happy
agree
to go
though
over
with what
Right.
both of you say. You know,
Right.
it's not that many, but I think it's not high, maybe urgent, but I think it's urgent so that we get something in place
Agreed.
that it will work and it won't take 8 weeks to do something,
Right.
or it won't take,
Right.
you know, get a whole bunch of people involved, and it won't take a massive amount of training in the future either. I sincerely hope it won't.
Well, let me add, or let me try to comment, and I won't try to cover everything. I don't think I don't think that would be possible. But when I said training, I'm not talking about a massive amount of training. I'm talking about probably one session, maybe 15, 20 minutes. So that would be one thing. In addition, so I'm not sure really what's the best way to go. Again, I'm happy to meet with you, and I think it would probably be good
should
if
we
Councilor
wait
Huddle.
until the next meeting or in January to see where things have gone, and then with all 3 commissioners here, at least discuss where do we want to, you know, set up another workshop or something rather than give any direction today.
Yeah,
is what I'm saying.
either is fine. Probably it would be good if you're available for the 3 of us to get together either sometime this week or next week.
Oh, I agree completely.
Okay, very
I
good.
wasn't
Very
trying to.
Will you be here next week?
Okay.
I'll be here, yes, I will.
Next week, but the Friday, the 20, okay, thanks, that's right,
Yeah,
good.
no,
All
it's
right.
sooner than later, for sure. I
Right.
wasn't trying to delay anything there, but rather than us to firm up and say, with just 2 of us here, and bring it back when you know, for some direction at the next meeting that Commissioner Gold is able to attend.
I'm willing to do whatever work you, Commissioner Huxley, and Administrator Hitt want to do on this. I've kind of sort of taken a back seat to Administrator Hitt, and I could probably work a little more closely with him on, you know, crafting it and responding to your concerns, Mr. Chair. So I think a meeting between the 3 of us next
Okay.
week, like a mini work group or something,
Great.
We could do that.
makes
Great.
sense.
Right.
I think I have time on my calendar, so.
Okay.
Again,
Commissioner
Commissioner
Boyce?
Boyce, if you want to.
Excuse me.
Sorry, go ahead.
No,
wondered
I
if
wasn't
you-
going to invite
Good,
myself.
okay, yeah.
Is it possible to come out of that meeting with the 3 of you, mini workshop, which I think is appropriate, that you might have a draft to recommend to the full board?
Well,
I just look at the 3 of you working on this, and it might be some very productive time, and I know that's the intent, but I mean, I'm just highlighting that a little bit.
So skip the workshop process then.
I would.
If you thought,
I don't know. I would still want to.
Well, I get, maybe
you're-
we'll make that call after we put our heads together.
I'll rephrase it. I'll just remain hopeful
Yeah.
that it might work out, that you come out
Okay.
with one draft
Yeah.
recommendation.
Sure.
And with the 3 of you involved, I can't imagine we wouldn't want to support that if that makes it easier, interest of time, and moving forward. That's all. Thanks.
yeah, just let me make, if I may.
Absolutely.
Chairman, one general comment, and again, let me just say one more time, I'm happy to meet with you and go over this and with Councilor Huddle, and I do believe we can come up with a final draft that hopefully everybody's comfortable with. But just one general comment here, because I had read what you'd written before, Commissioner Huxley, and it has a lot of good things in it. And I did actually incorporate many, not all, because I think here's where it's difficult to do 2 things at once. And the 2 things at once are much of your comments deals with a lot of detail, it may be very good detail, it may be very important detail, but much of it is pretty detailed information. I think it's very difficult, and I'm not going to say impossible, but very difficult to provide that level of additional detail and still have a simple, fairly straightforward policy. Now, I'm more than happy to make the effort, and maybe we'll be, actually, I shouldn't say maybe, I know we'll be able to do something that's better than what's here, no question. But I am a little bit just a broad picture concerned that we don't get so focused on making sure we cover all the bases and yet at the same time try and say, well, but this thing's too complicated. So there's some happy mean in there.
And again, this is December of 15.
Right, I understand that as well.
Didn't change one character, one
Right,
word.
I understand. And I apologize for the formatting errors. As I said in the beginning, this is something I worked on personally. I was trying to let John Jesuit do minutes, and I'm really horrible as far as the formatting type stuff. So
It's the age of you don't have to be perfect, hopefully.
thank you.
You mean he's reached the age? Is that
No,
what
no,
Yeah,
no.
way-
I'm talking
way up
about,
there.
we're approaching 2020. Is that the right year? I just want to offer that there's an intent here to serve the public and do the good thing, but I think the public doesn't want us to spend too much in the way of valuable time and resources to look for perfection. I think we can protect their interest and protect your staff time for whatever that's worth. I just want to offer that, and I think we've got a good plan and direction to go here.
Okay. So let me see then. Now we're going to move to the document that was provided by County Council on the nuisance abatement options.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is a follow-up on some of the citizen input from the last meeting, and I think is it Hamilton?
Yes.
Lane,
Yeah, Hamilton Lane.
In Harbor, Oregon. There was a fire. We saw photos. There were photos in the paper. The board directed staff to, basically get cracking on this. And since that meeting, and at that meeting, I had some ideas in my head, and I shared them with county administrators since then. But essentially, there are multiple paths to enforce the situation out there. One, yes, we have a sheriff department that could enforce criminal laws. We have a building code division that can enforce the building code, and we've recently adopted a process for issuing citations to persons. The idea behind the citations, and it's more or less like a traffic ticket, it's like, here's a fine, pay the fine, and that case is closed. Well, paying a fine does not remedy the situation entirely. The idea is if you cite someone and they get a fine, they'll say, ow, that was painful, I better fix this. But that doesn't always happen in these kind of cases. I've been involved in a few of them at my prior jurisdiction. And we do have on our code in the codified ordinance of the county a nuisance abatement program where where the board has a report of a nuisance. They then direct their designee to go issue a notice to the violator and call them in front of the board for a hearing on whether or not a nuisance exists. After that hearing, if the board determines that a nuisance exists, they issue an order directing the person to fix it, and if the person doesn't fix it, it tells them that the board will then fix it and charge them back the cost for remediation. Before the board can fix it, the board then needs to get a circuit court order, and that would be my role. There's a part in the ordinance that it says the board directs the county council to go commence litigation to enforce it. And so those are the steps. I think we could get a notice out as quickly, the board could direct the notice. We can't take action today. At the January 3rd meeting, you could direct the administrator to have a notice. The idea is the notice has to give the person, it has to identify what they're being essentially charged with and when and where they have to appear within a reasonable time. They have to be given a reasonable time to appear. I think a 2-week window to the next meeting on the 17th, we could have the hearing. The board could make a decision. We can issue an order. You have to give the person a reasonable amount of time to remediate. We could then give them, 30 days or until another 2 weeks. We would it probably wouldn't take 2 weeks for a person to remediate that issue, which basically means tear down the building. and take it away and get it disposed of. And then in the meantime, if they don't, we have the enforcement officer, in this case the county administrator, go out and check to see if it's been done. If not, we would then apply for a court order. That would then start another process. So the person that we would be going against would have multiple opportunities for a hearing before their property essentially would be taken away. We'd be seizing their property, even though this is horrible, terrible, burned out property. There are still, individual rights against government action, and we'd follow all those steps. For our process at the county level to be done could take perhaps 30 days, be another perhaps 60 days in the circuit court arena. There are avenues to make things happen more quickly, but I'm giving you, an outside look. But that's what I would recommend, that if it's okay with the two of you today, that I bring back an agenda item for you to order the county administrator to issue a notice to the offenders. And the offenders can be the property owner, and there are particular requirements of who gets notice, and we would follow those legal requirements. But it's really just, I wanted to let the board know, so why are we doing this now that we haven't done it before? Excuse me, part of the memo outlines that. Before, the only enforcement officer under our code was the sheriff's deputy. It said, or someone else the board authorizes. There hadn't been that person. Now we have the county administrator. And then the other part was that in the public meeting last week, I said we have never really had a dedicated fund for paying the contractor. If we were going to remediate it, we have to pay somebody, really. I know perhaps we could get a volunteer. I think the reality is we're probably gonna have to pay someone, and we used to not have that fund. In the last budget cycle, we funded a position. The position never got filled, so I think there's money, and we could just do a transfer. So those are the two reasons why we can do this now that we haven't been able to do it before. And if the board's okay with that, we'll bring something back for the 3rd, directing a notice to be given, and then setting a hearing for the 17th. And if there's any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Commissioner Boyd?
Unfortunately, I don't see any way to do it any faster than what you are proposing.
It's true, and the history of our code, this is Article 6 in our Curry County ordinances. Article 10 says, because the processes of Article 6 are so cumbersome, we're adopting Article 10, which allows us to issue citations. Again, sometimes if someone gets a ticket, they'll stop doing things. I don't know that that's always going to be the case. So I think this is an alternative. It's cumbersome. We've identified it as such, but it is an option that's available to us. And as cumbersome as it is, it may be effective. So.
Administrator Hitt?
No, I think that's the most appropriate pathway to follow.
Okay.
I thought it was a good suggestion.
Thanks.
And again, we can't shortcut and with an iron hand of government and bypass constitutional rights or of the individuals or the property owners.
Nope. They would have multiple opportunities to present their case and also take action and comply with the law without us having to do anything.
But that also includes the people that are living there, because we don't know what the circumstances are in relation to the owner.
If I could, right. So again, briefly, part of the way we notify people is by posting on the property, and then also by mailing and trying to do personal service to the people who are actually the registered owner on the tax records. Those are two of the standard ways to do it. But the one issue with the people living on there, now I've mentioned our nuisance code. Our nuisance code would abate the burned out structure. What we have, our nuisance code does not prohibit people from living in a garage, which is one of the allegations that's happening out there. That would be handled by our building code and those kind of things. And that's where the memorandum recommends a two-step approach. That, I think, is still ongoing, but the building code approach also doesn't address the burned out structure, which they're sort of hand-in-hand problems. And I think we probably need to do two approaches to handle both issues. But there's no reason I could see not to try this approach that I'm suggesting.
Okay, just one.
Commissioner Boyce?
Have we had any contact with the owner? I mean, I should have asked that a long time ago, and I guess I just
I personally have not. We've had the complaints from the citizenry, and then I think perhaps the sheriff's department has been out there. I think I've heard that, but I've got good confidence in that information, but I don't know how currently they've been out there and whatnot.
The building official did have contact when he went out there a couple of months ago, whenever it was, and he advised the owner, A, because I guess she threatened to tear down his notice when he posted it, that she was not allowed to do that, and B, she was also that the garage or whatever, the outbuilt barn, whatever it is, was not not approved or not allowed to be a residential structure.
Right, and
So she's been informed.
Yep, and I've talked to people, and they said there's evidence of, food containers as well as bedding in the garage, which is good evidence of habitation.
Right.
So, sounds like habitation is going on where it shouldn't.
Right.
Anyway, so we have multiple bases to act. This is a basis that is independent of the building department, so that we can, do a two-prong approach, as it were. So I think with that, Mr. Hitt, you and I will be talking to the board on January 3rd more about this. Okay, that's all I had.
Great work, thank you.
Okay, so we then will not adjourn, we will break for lunch, and we were scheduled, or have scheduled, to come back at 1:30 to pick up on agenda item 6, which is the communication towers by the Roadmaster Robbins. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We're back on,
Okay.
It's 1:30, we're back from a lunch recess, Wednesday, December 13th, 2017.
Yeah, microphones. Yeah.
1 out of 4.
Raise my hand.
Again, for the record, it's we're back from a lunch recess. It's Wednesday, December 13th, 2017. 1:30 p.m. We're back, and this topic is for the communication towers. Doug Robbins of the Road Department. Doug, you want to come up?
Good afternoon, Doug Robbins with the County Road Department. Thanks for letting me get together with everybody and cover a bunch of stuff here.
Hang on, Doug.
Got me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to say that my job, I've been tasked with managing the tower sites, and as I've gotten time, I've taken a lot of time to look through our agreements and oversee the budget. And during all that, I've found several deficiencies in all of it. So that's part of the reason I'm here today. And then the other part is the condition of the equipment at the sites and the cost. We're looking ahead at what that's going to take to replace and bring those things up to speed. So for the first piece of that'll be the condition of the equipment at the sites. And I've invited Calvin, Amy with Day Wireless. Day Wireless is they manage, we have management agreements with them at the sites, and we also have maintenance agreements with them through the Sheriff's Department and the Road Department. So I'd like to welcome Calvin up, and he's going to go through the first portion of this, and then I will come back and talk about costs and those kind of things.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Calvin Amy with Day Wireless Systems. As Doug mentioned, we help manage and maintain the city and county systems within Curry County. Back in early 2016, realizing that the system is aging, and I'll talk briefly about the system, of course, and some of its components at a high level, but the parts and components that make up the radio gear, the microwave system, the PSAP system, which is the dispatch console system, are all coming to end of life. Now, this has been known. It's not an unknown. We've spoken about this 2-3 years ago. But of course, the money aspect, it's expensive equipment to replace. But what I'd like to do is talk a bit about your current system. So your current system is made up of 5 separate sites. You have Cape Blanco, Agnes, Grizzly, Bosley, and Black Mount. Okay, so those are 5 of the sites that transmit out throughout the county to help the Sheriff's Department and other users who are on the system. That whole system comes back and feeds into the courthouse. And the courthouse, of course, is where the dispatch consoles are installed. Unfortunately, back up a little bit more, about 2 years ago, the county decided to implement a microwave monitoring system. And this was to be used as a tool. And the tool is that it monitors the system, it looks for any dropouts, any what they call fades, any problems whatsoever, and it reports back to Day Wireless through computer. Basically says, hey, this site has a specific issue. Now, over the course of the past year, exponentially, we've seen greater and greater failures. Unfortunately, these failures are happening with equipment that we can no longer find parts for. So that is becoming even a greater concern. As a matter of fact, our technicians are out at Cape Blanco today, troubleshooting yet another alarm that came in just early this morning. So in a nutshell, you have a simulcast system. All the sites basically transmit at the same time. But the sites are smart enough to know where a user is and be able to receive that specific location. This goes through a device, a widget, if you will. It's called a comparator. All these parts and pieces were installed, and I'm going to take a gander at this, 2003-ish? 2002. Okay, so, 15 years down the road, these parts, in particular, the microwave system, is constantly on. It's constantly talking to one another. So the bottom line is that it really needs to get replaced. So all I would like to do, and of course any questions, is to prioritize, because again, it's an expensive endeavor. And I don't know, did you receive a copy of this rough order of magnitude? Okay, it's just that. They're not hard numbers, but they're realistic numbers, but they're not hard numbers. So I would assume that some of these costs would be less than what's actually within this document. From a failure standpoint, the number one priority, in my opinion, is your microwave system. You could treat a system upgrade as a forklift where you do everything at one time. That's a huge expense to incur. Or we can do parts and pieces at a time based upon the failure rates. So the microwave system would be number one in my book, followed by the transmit repeaters and antennas. That would be considered we'll call that the RF portion of the project. And then either simultaneously or thereafter, the console dispatch system. Each one of them, again, having a large cost involved with them. Also within this document, the county had voiced concern 2-3 years ago that with the initiation of the SEC mandate of narrowbanding, the coverage areas had decreased significantly, which is true. They have. So within this document, it also includes provisions and a rough order of magnitude for 2 additional sites to help cover in to areas that are currently, unfortunately, have less coverage than they did in the past due to the narrowband compliance. So that is also involved with this rough order of magnitude. So that being said, we do what we can in the interim. We ensure that their mobile portable radios are up to snuff, that they are working properly, and of course we monitor and maintain the sites. There's more to a site than just an antenna and gear. You often have backup generators, you have batteries, you have all these other parts and pieces that go along with it. So without getting, like I said, too technical, the bottom line is number one's microwave. That's really an issue right now. It's critical, in my opinion. the amount of failures that we are receiving on a daily basis. We're receiving more failures than what's being reported. And that's because the officers aren't in the area when the failure happens. And that is an issue for public safety. So, any questions or?
Administrator Hitt?
So when you say microwave system, what exactly are you talking about? I know what a microwave is. I know what microwave frequencies are, but what do you mean by microwave system?
It would be all the microwave dishes, what they call the outdoor units, the indoor units.
Okay.
It would be the comparator, and in a nutshell, that's basically it. You're looking at the microwave dishes, which is the antenna, and then the radios, the replacement of for each site, including the courthouse.
Okay, so new dishes, antennas, if you will.
Exactly.
And new radios within each of these sites.
That support the microwave.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Right.
Call that a phase one again. And
Okay,
again, this
right.
is
Okay.
I'm just my advice. And then a phase two would be to upgrade your radio, your two-way mobile communication repeaters, and potentially subscriber units, which are the radios installed in the vehicles
Right.
and or the portable radios.
So if I'm a sheriff deputy and I'm sitting in my car and I'm talking on my radio, approximately what frequency am I broadcasting?
Oh, I don't know what you guys are at, 156-ish.
Okay, and when somebody in dispatch talks back to me, they talk back pretty much on those same frequencies?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so then you're sending those modulated frequencies out over the microwave. Is that what you're saying?
The RF that is provided by a mobile or portable goes to the RF antenna that's up on a mountaintop
Okay,
site, and
okay.
at that point in time, it will go through a microwave system as well. So, in a nutshell, it works both ways. But from a radio, the radio itself, a transmission right to the tower, has nothing to do with the microwave. It's a transmission from the tower back to dispatch that goes through the microwave system.
Oh, okay. So that's the piece.
Yeah, it's two different components,
okay.
but
I understand. Okay. So when you say the dishes, so they are failing just because of weathering? I mean, a dish. I mean, I've seen microwave
in the
dishes.
dish itself, it's pretty tough to fail a dish
That's
unless
what I'm thinking.
unless it's called a pressurized dish. Pressurized through what they call a feed line. It helps keep moisture out. It's really not the physical dish.
Okay.
It's really the outdoor units, the indoor units.
Okay.
It's the cards, the comparator cards.
Okay.
We're scrambling to find cards to replace your failed cards. In fact, I'm fortunate in the standpoint that I take care of my team. We take care of 12 counties. And we have a decent resource pool where if we have a failure in, say, Douglas County, and I have somebody in Klamath County or Del Norte County or whatever, we'll do trade agreements, one PSAP 911 agency to the other. We're at this point in time where, they have what they call a Gold Elite dispatch system. Well, I catch wind that a county in Washington is going to take down a Forest Service, is going to take down 20 Gold Elite stations. The first call I made was to their technicians. I want every single one of them. Give me every part and piece. Just to help keep this heartbeat going on the Gold Elite dispatch solutions. The same thing applies with the microwave and the RF side. We are in this process of trying to locate various parts and pieces, albeit used parts and pieces, but just to sustain the system, knowing that there is not an immediate fund of money to replace these pieces of equipment.
And then you also said for number 2 priority, repeaters and antennas. So again, I have a similar question. Repeaters, in my mind, are just small radios that pick up a signal, amplify it, and send it back out?
That's what a repeater is, yeah.
Okay.
They're
And-
100 watt. They're not small. They're bigger,
Oh, okay,
but
okay.
they're commercial grade
okay.
P25 compliant repeaters.
And where are those typically located?
They're going to be located at the mountaintop sites.
Oh, they're also at the mountaintop site. Okay. And then their signal goes out through an antenna.
Mhm.
And so again, why are these antennas failing? Is there some particular...
Those antennas themselves aren't necessarily fading. It's just a good suggestion. You're at a 15-year mark of an existing antenna.
Okay.
Replace it. I
Okay.
mean, you're looking at a couple grand for an antenna. You get new feed line, the whole 9 yards. It's just wise to do. Is it absolutely necessary? Not at all. I mean, we can
Okay.
go there, we can say, hey, we swept this antenna, sweeping it, we hook a
Right.
computer up to it, we check it,
Okay.
forward reflected and all that.
Yep.
Probably check just fine. I mean, we do that once a year anyways. It's just part of this rough order of magnitude. We just say, hey, let's get all the parts and pieces replaced so we know we're starting fresh.
Okay. And then my last question, at least for now, is you said something that kind of surprised me. You said that due to new, I don't know how new, FCC regulations, you can't get the range you used to have.
Yeah.
So my question is, by going to, now is that, those FCC regulations, do they apply to all frequency ranges? Is there another frequency range we could go to and
Sure.
escape
They
that?
do. They apply to all VHF, public safety.
VHF, okay.
Yeah, which
Okay.
we're kind of stuck in that for now. There's plenty of options for 700, 800 megahertz system,
Okay.
but I don't even want to get into that right now.
Okay, just because of cost.
Oh,
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, that was, all right.
yeah, it may be in there somewhere. I don't know, but I
Okay,
can get you an
okay,
idea.
okay.
But that narrow banding really hurt, and it hurt everybody across the nation. When it was rolled out, and by the way, this was back in like 2012, so it's
Okay.
been 5 years
Okay.
or so. Metropolitan areas, not so much. It didn't hurt because they had plenty of overlap
Mhm.
with multiple towers. But when you got into the rural markets, like Curry County or any county, mountainous in particular,
Right.
it was very difficult. And the prior sheriff, current sheriff, all frustrated, of course, and rightfully so. Not just in this county, every county. PSAPs frustrated, directors frustrated, because when they knew, their dispatchers knew how far that their
Right.
units can go, and then when that gets lost, yeah. So that's what, on top of degraded equipment, on top of that, it's really created holes in the system, various holes.
Are there upgraded radios that could go in the cars themselves, supercharged radios, as it were, that would help overcome that, or that technology just isn't there?
Well, there's options for that, and I'll give you a couple examples. Joel, you guys run a 50 watt? Okay. So, and I believe it is too, but there's an option. FCC gives a maximum output power for a mobile radio at 100 watts.
Oh, okay.
But the 100 watt radio is darn near twice as much, of course, as a 50 watt radio. So that's a bit of a balance in terms of budget versus power. In the end, I could have 1,000 watts, but if I still have poor signal coming in from a tower due to narrow banding, it's not going to make a bit of difference for that officer to hear dispatch.
Okay.
Dispatch might be able to hear them perfectly
Yeah,
fine,
yeah.
but the other way around, it doesn't work quite as well. There are also other options called vehicle repeaters
Okay.
that can be utilized as well.
Would you say there's really any practical way, or by employing different technology, or maybe spending a little bit more on equipment on either the transmit side or the receive side at the cars, to avoid having to find two new locations, two new sites? Because that seems to me like the really expensive piece here.
It is. That's a good question. I'd have to look at propagation maps to determine
Okay.
dB levels on what they
Right.
call the downlink side. But any enhancement is for the better, number one. So if the sheriff's department can end up going with a 100 watt radio, it's certainly going to help to
Okay.
some degree.
Okay.
But it's never going to help on the reception side. So to your question, is there anything we can do at the sites above and beyond that what we currently have that could help coverage? One possibility would be to increase tower height at that existing site for antenna placement. Another possibility would be to change the gain of some of these antennas or the
Okay.
direction.
Right.
In the end, nothing beats more sites.
Well, true.
You know, right?
Yeah, true. Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of times, based on my experience, relationships with landowners that the county may have for easements or some sort of a lease option, I've seen that happen before for, you know, members of the community who are willing to give a 50-foot by 50-foot. If that's very powerful, it goes a long ways. Sites don't have to be overly expensive. And I'll give you an option or an example on this. I'm working with the city of Grants Pass for a site. It's a simple site. It's a 10 by 10 structure. It has a 50-foot, what they call a Roan 45 tower. And these towers are 10 grand. We're gonna probably get this whole site put in, compound everything, foundation, grounding, you name it. We'll probably get that in for about $160,000. All right, it's a very small site. It's what they call a green site. It's solar. So you look at I know you see these sites, these massive lattice sites, and they are a lot of money. I used to build them a lot when I was in the cellular days, and they can range from $250 to $750 or higher. It doesn't necessarily mean you need that.
Okay.
You know, so there's options, and we as Day Wireless have not completed an engineering study for the most part, meaning an actual certified engineered study of where we would recommend new sites. Why? Because the money wasn't there to have this study. So what we did is basically said, okay, we know where your coverage is. Based on officer feedback, we know where your holes are. So if we go approximately here and here, we can figure out the details later, if you will. Yes, sir.
There's been discussion, you know, when you've referenced to the technology, where is technology? You went back referring to what, you know, when some of the cell technology was. What is the technology? Where is the technology on satellite?
Oh,
I mean, we
on actual.
on satellite communication.
That's a good question.
Hundreds of, I would presume, hundreds of satellites up there that are leased, rented. We have clearly government.
Sure.
We have satellites. We'd probably be scared to know what
Right.
they are. So it's
Yeah.
not that technology does not exist.
Absolutely correct.
We can communicate to people hundreds and hundreds of thousands of miles away. I mean, and GPS has come a long way, you know.
Correct.
And so, you know, and again, I'm sure there are requirements, you know, we talk about law enforcement and so forth, but clearly the government, to use that term loosely, you know, on NASA and other satellites, you know, that are used or in place
Right.
today,
And they
have
use it,
equal,
Sure.
I'm sure,
Yeah.
security measures. I just see it as the future. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah, it very well could be. I don't have any information on geosynchronous satellites mated with P25 or 911 agency systems. At least I haven't heard of any. That doesn't mean that somebody's out there maybe using them. I just don't know. I don't have an answer for you. I can tell you that I have not seen any equipment mated to a satellite, but I haven't looked for it either. So it could be out there. I'm just not aware. GPS-wise, yes, the radios that would be purchased down the road, these next generation radios all have GPS capability with them. But that's really for tracking more than that's for
true. Understand.
dispatch tracking. Yeah.
But it's a progressing
Yeah.
technology. That's the reason
What we're
bring
seeing
it up.
is we're seeing public agencies starting to move away from VHF and go to the 700, 800 megahertz system, which is a full digital, what they call trunked system. It's excellent quality, clarity-wise. We actually have one operational in the Rogue Valley area, although not for the emergency communications, believe it or not. The transit system has it. They're very robust systems. That's where I see public safety going in terms of right now. But I don't have a good, I can find out though what is available for satellite
I
integration.
would be curious if
Yeah,
it's
I would
not,
be-
you know, a monumental cost. And I can't see that it would be for some just investigation, but I just
Sure.
see it as a, you know, it wasn't that many years ago, we didn't even have cell phones, for Pete's sakes. And we were spending, what, $1 million or $500,000 per site for the little call boxes, you know, at the side of the roads that were every mile or 2 miles on all, you know, your major highways. And those are, in a matter of a few years, were obsolete
Sure.
because of technologies.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, got it.
Okay. Commissioner Boyce?
You just mentioned a couple new sites, and lo and behold, about the time if we could somehow finance 300,000 or 400,000 for those sites, then the technology would sure as shooting the ride.
Right.
There we would be. I'm assuming that you haven't had a chance, nor Doug, to look at additional locations for a couple of sites, and then and also in that would they possibly carry a bigger load proportionally that would maybe. I mean, you just said it, and I was kind of anticipating that the more sites, the better, especially in our rugged terrain, correct? Yeah, so it probably isn't going to outdate any of those sites if we somehow did get the financing for, you know, a couple of new sites to carry the load.
A couple of well-placed sites. They have to be well-placed, and when we offer up such a solution, we don't just say, oh, let's just go build a site. We test it. So we'll go out there and emulate with what they call them a Colt, or they used to call them a Colt, cellular on wheels, or cow. But a vehicle that can actually has a telescopic antenna, get above tree line. You test the results. Okay, is this the expected result based upon the propagation maps? Then everybody agrees based upon feedback. We move forward with a lease agreement and that sort of thing. Yeah, I haven't had a chance to actually look at various areas, and to tell you the truth, I don't know the area well enough to. I usually rely on Joel or the sheriff to give feedback of that nature, or Doug. But if that's the direction, and I don't want to get away with priority number one, because priority number one really is, in my opinion, we need to get that microwave fixed. And you may want to shift around priorities to where you add 2 new sites, et cetera. But we can certainly look at options and then develop propagation maps comparing our current coverage, talk in, talk out, which is talk into the system, talk out from the tower, and then what that looks like now with 2 new towers and the coverage and what gets filled in. We computer model those, and we can put those together for presentation, certainly.
Yeah, is it in your report, the approximate cost to just do for number one priority, the microwave system? Did you?
You know, I think they put
estimate that first?
I believe they put a rough order of magnitude in there for this. And forgive me, this was done almost.
Yeah, a couple of years or so ago.
Well, actually, you know what? I thought it was done earlier last year. It was done mid last year, so not as long as
a year.
I thought.
Okay.
August of 16.
Okay.
Yeah, back in the forgive me, somewhere in here they had it broken out. It's probably towards the very rear. Okay, yes.
Microwave backhaul network, the one that says that?
6, you got it. You got
Okay.
it.
So 447 to 726.
Yeah, and
Okay.
obviously what a range.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, so.
All of those, even the low number looks really big to us, but that's okay.
Understood, understood. The microwave system, the only drawback to a microwave overhaul is you can't piecemeal it. Meaning,
Okay.
you could with newer technology, but this technology is the older type, if you will. So from a comparator standpoint, which determines which site's going to be used to help that officer speak, talk to dispatch, everything would need to get upgraded. Keep that in mind, because everything else, if you decide to then go to phase 2 to replace repeaters, you do them site at a time. It doesn't have to be done at all one time.
Okay. Okay, very good.
Yeah, and again, these numbers, I get it. It's a ROM. But if you need us to sharpen a pencil on that, certainly we would ask sales to get on that.
Why was the reference to a quantity of 6 there versus the 5 and plus possibly 2 additional ones? Pardon me?
The 6 is from the courthouse, sir.
Oh, okay, that's,
So technically,
okay,
yeah, 6.
okay, gotcha.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I should have counted the courthouse as 6. I apologize.
A few months ago, I was talking to the Sixes Fire Department, and they were having some of the blank spots that you just referenced there, and I can't remember who explained to me, but it was essentially that with all 5 directing at the same time or transmitting at the same time.
Overlap?
Overlap is a better word, yeah. And you may not have had the parts to adjust it so that you could.
You talking about the tsunami siren?
No.
He's talking about the paging system in North County. Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
So you did, as I understand it, you didn't have the right parts to get them kind of synced up so that they wouldn't have that dead spot, or sometimes it was a muffled because of kind of a delayed basis from one of the other towers. So you help me better understand that, what you're up against there, what we're up against.
It's, like I said, we came here today to help Joel Hensley and the Sheriff's Department with their mobile vehicles. We spent the better half of the day up on the mountaintop sites chasing alarms. That's just this morning. And I mentioned this earlier, and it's kind of scary when we receive more alarms than the customer knows. And we're chasing these through, and then trying to find the parts to replace or fix. When we go to a site and we have parts that have been used from who knows how long ago, are they still good? They weren't marked, that sort of thing. So we're up against a bit of a hill when it comes to the system in Curry County. But you could say that, you can go to any other county and they're going to tell you the same right now, especially in Southern Oregon. Calvin, I can provide a little testimony to that real quick. Sure.
Come up, Joel.
Afternoon, everyone. Sergeant Joel Hensley, Curry County Sheriff's Office, Jail Commander, Dispatch Supervisor. Calvin isn't giving, he's doing a good job, but he's not giving a lot of credit to his people where they're working really hard on that North County problem. I became aware of that about, it's probably almost been a year now, about the overlap issue. I didn't realize it was going on for a while, but I think it was part of when we moved a site off of Stone Cipher Mountain, we moved it down to Cape Blanco, which was a clearer, better site. Our Stone Cipher site used to just get obliterated by the weather. It was a location that was great. It oversaw the entire North County, but it was described to me as putting your thumb over a fire garden hose, how it creates a lot of pressure. Well, the wind current over there would just abuse that tower site. So we moved it down to Cape Blanco, a lot better site. However, it created this bubble. Now this bubble has been worked on for a long period of time, but it's an overlap from the dispatch frequencies from Cape Blanco combining with the frequencies from Grizzly. I'm not a tech, I'm a cop, so this is my best way to describe it. It becomes white noise over the two. So those two signals actually combine and neutralize each other. So the techs have done what I believe to be a very good job of trying everything they can. They have turned up the amplitude at Blanco, turned it down at Grizzly. That created problems at Edson. None of them could hear it, so then we turned it back up at Grizzly, tried turning it down at Blanco. That didn't really seem to have any effect except for North County. The radios weren't as good. So then we've even discussed going with a directional type of antenna, which is, I think, thinking outside the box. They're talking about trying to figure out a way to make this work, because our citizens of the North County are very important to us, and we're trying to come up with the best solution, but with our aging equipment, we're doing everything we can. There is a belief out there, there's a very low-cost fix for it. I am not aware of anything. The numbers that have been kind of thrown around, and they're just throwing around numbers, are in the hundreds of thousands just to fix this one problem. So it's not, because I know that the question has been raised about the quality of the North County paging system. The radios seem to be okay, but the paging, we're aware of and we're trying everything we can.
Yeah, I didn't detect any criticism, and yeah, I haven't heard anyone say low cost on this, so I.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that that was known, and this was an opportunity for it to be brought up. And I know it has been a concern of the North County, especially the volunteer firefighters. People right in the middle of, the people that are actually in a worse area get better reception because of that washout. People inside buildings can receive the full page, full voice. People standing outside, right outside the restaurant, they get just the page, just the beeper will go off. So it's because of that washout, that bubble, but it's something they've been working on for a very long time.
Just, one of you might be able to, either one of you probably can answer this,
Sure.
but just tower locations, I know you've been spending a lot of time up there, and so you probably don't have an idea where that might be, but maybe we could figure out a way to get one at some point, and we might just hit it lucky and blend them in with the other 5, 6.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And there could be some alternative solutions for some of these overlap areas. Again, relationships with local communities is very important, because we could put a lower power, another simulcast repeater in a overlap area, which then we can turn down amplitude or output power of the two adjacent to fill in a gap. That's kind of a Band-Aid, though. You want a robust system, and you want to be able to build a tower that takes care of the needs, not just now in the future, solves an issue, and also offers a revenue-generating opportunity for you if you're involved with co-location, which it sounds like the county is involved with co-location and revenue from that. All that gets taken into consideration. It's really understanding where we must focus our needs to fix some of these issues with coverage, and then we model from there, and then we test to confirm.
Not to get sidetracked, you make reference to directional antennas. I know on some smaller scale things, they're pretty cool. Different mountains.
Oh yeah,
in California, but those. I don't know what their life whether they had trouble in the high winds or what. How prevalent are they, or how
they're robust?
in use?
Yeah, Yagi antennas.
They work pretty good.
Directional antennas or
Yeah.
Yagi antennas they're perhaps even more robust than what they call the full dipole, because you have a lot of loading weight, especially if it's iced over.
Okay.
But they can be, it's an interesting piece. Actually, we were talking this morning about the tsunami siren. What station was that? District Harris Beach. They've been experiencing a problem with during the monthly tsunami test, that specific site not going off. Well, it's because it's in this overlap area. So what did we do last month? We put a directional antenna, and it went off, which I was excited to hear today. Was that Port Orford? Oh, okay, Port Orford. But yeah, they have their benefits.
Thank you.
You bet.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of practical questions. Does your firm, let's say we were to give the go-ahead to do this microwave backhaul program, does your firm do financing?
Motorola does do financing, yes.
Okay.
Yes, the product sets that we would engineer and base upon would be a full Motorola system.
Okay. So would you charge us to detail this out and give us a kind of a semi-final number and what you feel you could do in the way of financing? Is there a charge for that?
There would not be a charge for that. No.
Well, unless the commissioners disagree, I would certainly like to see that.
Okay, very good.
Very worthwhile.
Yes. And perhaps we can look at existing propagation maps as well for some comparisons during the time of that presentation.
Oh, and I forgot my follow-up question. So let's say we were ready to submit an order today. All this had been worked out. We agreed to the financing terms. We said, go do it. What's your approximate time to get the thing completed?
New sites or not?
No, just this one, just this back
Just
microwave.
microwave?
Yeah, just the microwave.
Oh, just microwave?
Yeah.
I would say the vendor, I mean, we just ordered
some cambium equipment, not to say that that's what we would go with, but that took about 2 months to get in, if I recall. There would be no licensing changes, so there'd be no FCC involvement.
And time to install?
Time to install, all the links, probably a total of 10 days.
Oh, very quick. Okay.
Yeah.
So 2, 3, 4 months?
Yeah, I'd say 4 months.
Okay.
It's a,
Okay.
I think, a safe bet.
That's good to know.
Yeah. So, also, I will ask the sales team to provide any existing financial
Yeah, please,
incentives that
please.
Motorola may have.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Perfect.
You mentioned approximately 10, I'm just looking at the turnkey installation cost, and I'm dividing that by 10.
Okay.
That's a pretty big crew or equipment or combination
Yeah, I need to
of-
have 3 guys at every site,
Okay,
set of 3 at 2 sites at any one time,
okay,
plus my tower climbers. But that also includes all engineering fees.
okay, okay.
So there's a lot more to that. And again, this is just, it's a ROM.
Sure. Well, but again, I think as John had asked there, you know, we could get a closer,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
estimate at this point in
Oh,
time.
absolutely.
On that
Yeah,
portion.
that's no problem.
But on this portion.
Yep.
For the
Uh,
month.
When would you like that by?
Yesterday would be fine.
Well, just to
Well,
give,
realistically,
With,
you know, you're-
maybe within, I think if we ask within 30 days, I feel that we could rush it, and I don't want, within 60, is that fair?
yeah, just to let you know, we'll be putting together our budget for our fiscal year runs from July 1st through June 30th. So we would start to put preliminary budget items together probably late next month, early February. So 60
No
days.
problem.
60
No
days would
problem.
work in that, yeah.
Okay, and if we can get it fully designed and ready by next month, then we'll let you know.
super. Do you have a question?
Well, I just want to make sure on the equipment here, it is new. This,
Yes.
yeah.
Everything except your
I
tower.
understand what you're trying to accomplish
Yeah.
here. Well,
It says down at eBay, it says right there.
eBay,
Oh. Those are for your existing spare parts, eBay.
so if we could quickly become a taxing district, we could borrow them. Oh, did I say that? I'm sorry.
Well, may
I'm trying to make light, but
Yeah.
this is a
I make
tough.
a comment there,
You may.
Mr. Chair? Thank you. I did have a conversation with Gary Milliman on Friday where we talked about 2 main things. One, sharing some planning, building official duties, code enforcement duties, which Carolyn Johnson and I and Mr. Milliman are working on. So hope to bring something back to all of you in January, February. But one of the others is that he and the city of Brookings are very interested in potentially forming a communications district or area to service the entire county, including the city of Brookings, with 1 dispatch facility, center. So we may be, so I guess, yeah, that kind of triggers a question. So if we were to do this microwave backhaul link step, the priority 1 here, and then later, let's say a year later or 2 years later, a communications district were to be formed, I assume they could purchase all of the equipment, and that would be all something they could use. I mean, obviously they would want to update, just as you've suggested, but it would not be something that would be wasted, if you will.
Not at all.
Okay,
Yes, not at all. As long as it's P25
right.
compliant, it's plenty good. And I'm excited to hear that the city is,
Yeah, so we're going to definitely try to move that along to the extent that we can, and that the city council and the county commissioners agree, absolutely.
good, excellent.
Do you do or have the contract with Brookings or?
We service them as well.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you're familiar with the equipment, okay.
Yes, sir. Yes. Yeah, so we service, for the most part, most of all Washington, Oregon, California. Not all California, northern and southern. But in terms of partnerships, or at least countywide, and just a little history, and not to go on, I'll make this short. There was, of course, talk of having somebody else dispatch for the city. There's been options that have been looked at. you know, it's tough to get out of this area and have reliable connectivity with another adjacent PSAP or even a PSAP that's not so close, where you are relying upon microwave systems.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No, sir.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. I'll
Coming
send
by.
you.
Yeah, that would be great. I would appreciate it. I need to kind of get set up here for a second so I can put some stuff on the screen.
Okay.
Good.
John, you want to turn the lights down?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
A little bit easier to see. Yeah, yeah, please.
Yeah, whatever, for you guys. So just to look at my agenda really briefly here, we discussed the tower equipment conditions and replacement cost of Data Wireless. And the next piece of the discussion, it seems like we got some direction. We were looking at where some funds might come for the equipment replacement and who might take the lead on that. And it looks like to me that, you know, you're asking Data Wireless for some information. And once you get that, you're probably going to lead more into that, you know, funds. And sounds like you guys are kind of taking the lead, so I can kind of skip past that. The third thing here is I want to discuss the tower budget, the costs and the revenues. And then below that, I'm talk about the tenants, the current tenants' revenue and future revenue, and also consider a letter, which I will discuss shortly. And then discuss the costs of being in tower sites if they were under private ownership. I felt that the question might come up sometime is, what if somebody owned all these tower sites and we just rented space from them, what that would look like. So that's just a little add in there. And then discuss the future management of the tower sites and who and where we think that might need to go. So how do I get out of this thing here? That's a pretty touchy mouse.
Yes, everybody complains about the mouse.
Need to turn that down a little bit. But just for a quick overview, Calvin talked about the sites, and so looking at the county, we're looking at Cape Blanco site, just north of Port Orford, and it's about 3.5 miles off of 101 towards Cape Blanco Lighthouse. The site is owned by, the ground is owned by State Parks. And then the next one would be Agnes. We have a tower site up there, and it sits on U.S. Forest Service ground. And then our next one is straight above town here is Grizzly. Grizzly Mountain site is the hub of everything shoots into it from everywhere else and comes downtown to us. And that sits on BLM property. And then Bosley Butte is down, I would call it up on the Chetco. You can reach it by going up the north bank of the Chetco, up the Gardner Ridge and off in the hills. And it's one of our highest sites that we have. It's also a BLM ground site. And the final one is just out of Brookings. It's up the Carpenterville Road a little ways and up Henderson through a couple gates on South Coast property, and we sit on a hill called Black Mound, and that's also BLM. So just a little information on where the sites are. So folks that haven't been here and county accountants can get a feel for all this. So so to get a feel for the sites and what radios and who we have in them, I put together some stuff here. So so each site are listed here that we just went through. And at each site, these are the main radios that we have at each site: Law 1, Law 2, FireNet, roads, MedNet, search and rescue, and paging radio up there. And just to break it out kind of evenly, our costs at those sites a year, $83,333. Basically, I took all the costs other than electricity and fuel. You've got day wireless, you've got liability insurance, you've got admin and all these things that come up, and I just divided it out. And just to show you that we have 4 sites that are on electricity. These are based on actual amounts, and this is this year's budget. These are the type of numbers you see for electricity costs at those sites. As far as fuel, this fuel is for backup generators at all the sites, and this larger amount at Bosley, as you can see, that's at Bosley, that actually runs off of a big propane tank. And we split the use of that propane with ODOT. ODOT also has a big amount, or a building up there, and so we kind of use the same resources, and we also have backup solar power up at this site. And we also have a little bit at Black Mountain. And just real quickly, here's the agencies in these sites that are under contract or under an agreement. Briefly, you know, you got the road department, of course, the sheriff, Coos Forest, ODOT, and OSP, Gold Beach Fire here in Grizzly only, and we got Bonneville Power out at Cape Blanco, and then the one for-profit only that we have that's not an agency is AT&T, which is at the Agnes site.
Are they running cell towers off of that? I mean,
they have
antennas?
equipment inside our fence. So they have all their own equipment in there, but they're not in our building, and they're not using our equipment inside the building like all the agencies
okay.
are. They don't go through our radios.
Okay.
They have all their own equipment. So I look at those as off to the side of what I'm kind of talking about today to show the cost of the site, and you know how we could go about covering those costs with the folks that we have using our equipment in the sites. So as I dug into this farther, you know, all the folks that we had that I showed you before all have agreements. I dug into the agreements and spent a lot of time with those, and to see if we were getting properly paid, what the agreements are, how long they were, and spent a lot of time with that to kind of figure out whether things were working or going as the agreement. So then I had a meeting with the sheriff, several meetings, and discussed other agencies that were in there, and I didn't realize all these were in there, and I actually worked with Joel on this and asked him, you know, who else is in these sites, and so he started this list, and I found that these are all non-agreements, and they pay no fee to go through our site. And you probably recognize most of them: City of Port Orford, City of Gold Beach, the whole list.
Doug, do you know, are these all, well, obviously not the Cal or ambulance and maybe a couple of others, but are they mostly all taxing districts? Do they all have taxing authority, taxing revenue? Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay.
No, I couldn't answer
Like
that.
rural fire and
Yeah,
six
the rural
fire.
folks especially, I don't
Yeah,
know
okay,
that.
that's fine.
I have a question. You mentioned, so the last slide you showed us, it was the agencies at each site by agreement, and you had road and sheriff and then CFPA, and then you mentioned AT&T is within our fence but have their own stuff. That to me indicated like a physical presence. Are these also physically present, or are they kind of present at our site because they basically get use of the sites or something. Their signals are going through our site. I guess it, you know, if you get down into theory, whether a signal's physical or not, but these are using they're using it, but they may not physically be there. Is that the idea of,
Yeah,
of
yeah.
why these are kind of
So
different?
they're users, and I think
Oh, there's a physical radio
Yeah,
there.
right.
Okay.
that they're going through.
Correct.
Yeah.
But is it theirs, like the AT&T might be theirs, or is it just one radio serving all these ones?
So,
For each frequency, there's an actual specific radio.
Okay,
So for Law 1, there's a radio.
Yep.
And then there's the Quantar off to the side. That's
Yep.
the microwave side.
okay,
So each one of those, each one of these there's one for all fire nets,
okay,
and they're all simulcast throughout the county. So even though Langways and then this river, they'll still be both on fire.
all right.
And then we also, through our radio system, they're non-repeated, but they have a VTAX that they can talk
Mhm.
locally.
Uh-oh, I guess somebody's not on the mic or something. We're wireless. You need the wireless mic to
Oh,
be
wow.
picked up on the broadcast.
I think I'm done.
Okay.
For now.
Yeah, for now is what
Now,
John
yeah.
says. But good, thanks. I just wanted to, because it seems to tie into, you know, our dispatch services, but maybe
Well,
in some way, I don't know.
Dispatch fees, that's, okay, I'll just
Yeah.
share the podium.
you bet.
That's when we talked about that. That's to pay for that body in the seat.
Yep,
For that training of that person.
Right.
And for that person to make sure the appropriate person gets notified.
yeah,
Now, from there, how it's used through the towers and stuff, we made it pretty clear. It didn't cover equipment.
right.
And it didn't cover the towers.
So that's where the part of no fee, we're not charging any of these entities for their use of these.
That is
physical
correct.
pieces. Okay, all right. Thank you very
Okay.
much, yeah.
So I will add to that, that when the sheriff was in here earlier, we discussed, and Calvin, a couple other folks that I didn't realize were on here, and there's some hospitals and some other folks that shoot through our towers that aren't on here. So there's probably, I don't know how you find out who all those people are personally, but, you know, I guess that maybe you, the sheriff's department, might be able to come up with
Yeah,
some more of
I
that.
forgot about the hospital. But, yeah.
Okay. So, I just felt that, or that really alarmed me that there's that many people in our sites using them at no cost. And so when you start to look at the budget a little bit, and sorry I couldn't get this right, turned up properly, but it'll get there. And I just put this part of it on there just because the tower's operations, it states that it pays for electricity, the fuel, the generator operation of the agencies that have hardware and equipment in the communication shelters. These agencies include,
Oh, there's
but are not limited to. And it gives you all this and all the folks we kind of talked about here. And although it does say right there,
There's
Curry
Curry.
General Hospital,
Yep, yep.
and I didn't see that before. And the tower is essentially referred to the Curry County's emergency radio communication system that is critical for all safety, public safety, road emergency, and 911 communications. And so, you know, this fund is supposed to pay for all the issues and maintenance and things at the tower, and we're certainly not covering that at all, and you'll see that here shortly. And yeah, that mouse is really
Hypersensitive.
yeah. So they started working with the budget, and I have for a few years now. This is this year's budget, adopted budget, and you can see here's the folks we talked about that actually have agreements down to about here. Here's what we're paying, they're paying, and a couple things. Up until last year, the road department and the sheriff here have never paid a portion to be in the tower sites either. And of course, we're some of the biggest users, especially the sheriff's department with all those radios. And so we put in an amount we just worked on. It's not a going rate. It's not based off of anything really at this point. So I've been working on that for quite some time to figure out proper rates and how to come up with those rates. And so I've spent a lot of time talking to other agencies and Data Wireless, and I've come up with a sheet from ODOT that they actually have costs that are used throughout the state based off of their rates. So I'll get to that, but so we can talk about where these rates should go or where they might go. The other thing that I noticed in here is that we're supplementing the tower's budget with $36,298 of Title III money. So if you look back here a little bit, you can see over here in recent years these Title III funds that have been used to supplement this budget to balance it, I just say. And so that's not going to last much longer. Talking with Louise last year, the funds that are available to use for communications, Title III money will run out this next year. So we had about $70,000. Here's about half of it, if I remember correctly. And this is going to go away. And I had a couple things down here I just wanted to talk about before I go to the next slide, is that we have some stuff shown as an income here, but they're really reimbursements from Agnes. AT&T at the Agnes site, they pay rent on the ground, and that's required by Forest Service. So we pay it down here, as you can see it. We pay for it here out of the Towers Fund, and we get reimbursed up here, so it's really not an income. And this is the final sheet on the and just some costs that we went over on the first sheet shows our electricity bills based on true cost. Here's your fuel bills up there once again. And then you see all the admin costs here. And I don't know if these are proper percentages or for this type of an account or not. Sometimes it seems to me that these funds get overcharged with admin fees. So maybe something to consider or look at a budget.
Well, with what you got before us, it might be undercharged by the
It
time
could be.
by the time I'm done, Doug.
I've seen that.
I think it'll be undercharged.
I've seen that happen, but I always like to talk about the other direction.
No, I know.
Let's talk
We
about
can
the
only
road
hope.
fund being undercharged. Is that what you want to talk about?
No. You know my thoughts on that. So in a nutshell, I broke it down so you could just see, here's our actual costs. Here's our costs for Data Wireless and their services. This is for working on the sites and equipment, general liability, property insurance, the electricity, the fuel, and the admin costs. Here's our actual costs for the year in there so that we can look at actual costs. And I wanted to be able to compare that very plainly to actual revenue coming in right now.
Is that, Doug, is that Day Wireless still fixed?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, the agreement for their monthly maintenance, it's outlined what's in that. Anything out and beyond that becomes extra. Any extra parts, any extra travel, those kind
Well,
of
like
things.
what's going on now?
Oh, the stuff's going on now would be not covered. So that's the other thing about this budget is that, as Calvin said, these things are coming up more and more. So we're budgeted looking at the last few years. Now it's getting a lot worse, and I see this budget maybe running over at some point on maintenance expenses.
But miscellaneous things out of the contractual scope were in this 39,000 typically? Historically?
A lot of that contracts, I'm pretty sure it's the same contracts Doug has, it just covers labor. So all the parts that they talk about replacing and all that stuff, that's either coming out of our individual budgets for, like, mine's all the communication stuff. If it's something that intermixes with Doug's stuff, but that would cover like a climber to have to come out to replace an antenna, but we
How
have to
would-
pay for the antenna.
Cost-wise, so that we know what the total is as it progressively increases? How is it costed? Job
We
cost?
track all that at the
Mhm.
department. the
Okay,
road
so you
department.
know what the total
Yeah,
is.
every dime of it, yes.
Yeah, and we know that we've come out on the positive end by having these contracts with A Wireless.
Oh, okay.
Because
Yeah.
just in conversation with Calvin, last quarter, they wrote off like it was in the thousands and thousands of dollars because our contract was in place, just for all the labor fees to come back and forth. All the equipment the stuff that's going on with our vehicles today is all covered under our contract for our maintenance agreement.
Okay.
So unfortunately, it's expensive, but it's almost needed.
Yeah.
Sorry, Doug.
That's fine, thanks. And Tom, to answer some of your question, here's where some of those costs are to help, budget for some of those parts and stuff.
Okay.
Get rid of this here. So, current revenue. Current revenue by site and by agency in the site. And these are all under agreement. Most of these escalate at about 3% a year. And you'll see that I took AT&T out. I wanted to compare only the folks that are using our equipment in our sites and the cost of those running those sites inside. So in the end, when you look at all this and what the road department and the sheriff are paying right now, there's our yearly income. So we're about 50,000 short when you look at it. We're not showing the Title III down here. That's going to go away. So I just wanted to point it out that way so that you get a look at it, I think, more of reality than looking at a balanced budget. So I mentioned to you that I spent some time looking at all the agreements with the agencies that we have them. And I looked at the cost of running the sites, and I worked on trying to figure out how to spread the cost throughout the users. And I kind of started to recreate the wheel, and I figured out that I wouldn't have any backup to that. And I thought there's got to be somebody out there there's lots of other tower sites. There's got to be somebody to go to. So originally I talked to Day Wireless quite a bit about it. And then I finally made a call to ODOT, Rob Reese with their communications division. And come to find out, they done a large study a few years back of all the tower sites and agencies in Oregon, I think Idaho, Washington, and maybe one or two other states. And they done the big study, and they figured out a basis cost or a starting point for all the different scenarios in the sites. So I got my hands on that, and that was really helpful because I feel that that's where Day Wireless sent me in the end, is that these are the rates to start with, and so here's kind of what they look like. I don't know if I can downsize that a little bit somewhere. Oh yeah. That's kind of. There it is. Okay. So their rates are broke down by urban, suburban, and rural, and we fit in the rural under the 25,000. And so what they do is they have a public pricing, and they have private pricing. And so the public pricing ends up being 70% less than the private. So this is, whoever, a private firm, you're going to see this, and then folks like us would get a rate 70% less of that. And so they cover it by racks. It gives you dimensions, and that's the racks got all your different radios, and then your floor space that by the square foot, what that rack and your equipment takes up on the floor. And then they have some stuff here that's not discounted, your annual power fee, which they just $212. We could take all ours and divide it an average and come up with a rate that fits our sites, because like I say, these are all starting points, but I think they're very good information and a good area to start at. And then they talk about solar. We don't get into that too much, and some other fees here that we're not really dealing with too much. And then down here it breaks it into the dish. You got non-dish, and you've got dish antennas. And it basically, you've got sizes of dishes here, and you look at the zone that your dish or antenna is in up here, and you come across and you get the going rate. This is the market rate here for private. So if we took 70% off of that, we could back this into what it would look like for the agencies that are using our site. So that's probably just kind of the rundown on that. So after that, I put together some scenarios of what it would look like if we
We're following that.
So I come up first of all with the tenants that are in there that are paying, and most of it is they're underpaying tenants compared to the going rate based on ODOT's pricing for the state. And so in a nutshell, we break it down to the power of the backup generator, where their antenna is, and the equipment that they have in there, by how many radios they have in there. And so I just put our rate, broke it up. Here's what the current rate is that we're paying, or that they're paying now. Here's if they were at ODOT's rate, what they would be paying. And just a comparison, if you were outside in a private, you would be paying this rate. So as you can see, ODOT's rate is slightly less than this. I would explain though that these folks have had the agreement for some time, and their yearly payment goes up by 3%. So it escalates over time, but that doesn't mean this ain't to me, that's not an over rate. It's not just because it says it's higher than ODOT's rate. There's some reasoning for that. But for the most part, here's what we should be charging at, using ODOT's rates. Here's what we're getting paid. Here's what we should be charging. Here's what we're getting paid. And right on down the list, Bonneville Power up at Cape Blanco, they're paying slightly more, but we also have rate increases there. And some of these agreements are for 20 years. And so I don't know how long all of them have been going, but 3% as you go down the road. And Coos Forest, same deal, if they're paying 301, this is more in the rate they should be paying. And as you can see, just with these folks here, they're paying about half of what we should be seeing. So the next one is the folks we looked at that were at the sites. They don't have agreements and they're non-paying. I spent some time with on the phone with Day Wireless, gal that helps us with accounts and different things, and looking for customers for our sites. And so a rate that's used in the Portland area was 1, and for users going through sites up in that area are going for about $45 a month per radio. So we're not charging them anything, and all these guys are in there. And so I've asked the sheriff's department to try to find out how many radios each one of these folks have, so that we could come up with some kind of an idea what that might look like. If that's the rate, we should actually indeed charge them. I did talk to Calvin a little bit about that earlier too when he was here, and he felt that was a very low rate, $45 a month. So this might be a bargain at that price. This is just some numbers that I could come up with by talking to Day Wireless, and try to put something together for this. So really, we need to find out how many units each one of these guys have, and then we could see what the total is.
Now, are you in still process of doing that? You've listed it here. Is it like on your to-do list that you're following up on that, or somebody's following up
to actually
to see what the number, in this case, the
number
of units?
Oh, number radios. Yeah, I think Joel.
Still working on that.
Yeah.
If you back up to the prior page, and I know we've talked about this before with all the different contracts, and this one expires here, this one expires somewhere else. Do you have a pretty good inventory now on all that have contracts and when they are due to expire?
Yeah.
And what's the thought or the game plan or the thought process on what to do there as they expire?
I've spent some time with Council Huddle earlier on, and we talked about agreements and the possibility of getting new agreements, or getting out of the agreements that we're in and writing our own agreement instead of, a lot of the agreements that we have are from the agency, and they gave them to us and told us what they're going to do, is kind of the way I looked at it. And so we need to write our own.
Yeah.
John and myself have spent a bunch of time, put some stuff together. It's very close and ready to go. And that is a big portion of why I'm going through this whole process, is because I wanted to get some consensus here on your feel of new agreements, sending out letters to the agencies and make them aware of this and what's coming, so that they can budget for the new year and those kind of things. So that's kind of where I'm headed. But yes, to answer your question,
Now, with the ones that have still many years left on contract, you said, looking at possibly canceling?
Just talking to them and approaching them with the no harm in asking rule for starters, and then see what the next steps are after that. But just starting the dialogue, starting the conversation, telling them where we're at and what we want, where we want to go, and trying to work with them. And if we can't work with them, we'll see what our next options are. So just kind of that kind of thing.
Yeah, I would like to say also that some of those agreements state that you can opt out with a letter, give them 60 days notice or 90 days notice.
Wish they all had that.
Well, like I said, some of these agreements, as Doug said, they've been piecemeal, and we were more of a kind of a passive, or we would receive their agreements and their offers, so they had the terms favorable to them. And I don't want to keep bringing up that dispatch stuff, but if we kind of we had no agreements and went to standardized agreements, use our form, and it could, part of the reason I think Doug is telling you this is a courtesy to say you could see some type of feedback similar to some of that, as far as whether we're being, I don't know, fair or good partners, or partners probably not the right word, but good landlords, something like that. But anyway, it's and then I don't know how this dovetails into the earlier part of the conversation with the district-wide techno upgrade, and then John Hitt's last thing about looking at consolidating and stuff. And if it's going to be, for the time being, it's us doing this, but maybe in the
absolutely.
future it would be, and all those would all have to be talked about. So,
You're talking about the Brookings?
yep.
Because I know discussions, just in general discussions in past years, what's come into that was quick, for some to say that will never happen because every single district, whether that was accurate or not, would have to agree, or every affected entity using those services now would have to agree to that. Whether that's accurate is
On the
another.
dispatch side or on the communications
Well,
side?
on the dispatch and the communication.
Yeah,
basically
and dispatch,
both.
I wouldn't be involved in.
Yeah.
But they've talked to me
Yeah.
about it, and sheriff has, and that's kind of,
Yeah,
I guess it's part of the system, but it's not part of the tower system.
Right,
They just
right.
Yeah.
work through the.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Okay. One more question for Doug. As I look at these numbers, what strikes me, unless there's something built in here that doesn't meet the eye, is that these numbers don't seem to include a proration of capital costs.
I'll talk about that.
Oh, it's coming up.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm
sorry.
glad you brought it up, but
Yep.
that is
Yep.
something that I planned on discussing
Okay,
here at the
sorry.
end. So, we're gonna look at another budget here in a second, but, so we do need to come up with some proper pricing here. And, everybody that I've seen on all agreements pretty much are subject to this, so that should be something common which we would place on ours.
You want to let them know where we're sending from Signal
Oh,
about this?
yeah,
It's all over the agency, so they know what we're talking.
sure. Okay, so, throwing all the numbers in there at ODOT rates and just trying to get a
Yeah.
look ahead of what that might look like. Here's the current, which I talked about at 33,000. And when we throw the proper amount, or this is a starting point. Once again, this is not the set number, but these are numbers. The one thing that's off is I just threw in those 13 agencies that aren't paying, the non-payers that are not under agreement. I just threw in one radio each. Said they all have one radio each. That would add $7,000. I'm guessing there's triple that, maybe.
Probably, yeah.
So if there was, in a nutshell, that
You're
is.
talking about individual subscriber ratings, right?
Yeah. So handhelds and any units that any of those agencies use.
Yeah, minimum 3.
So we could be looking at 30, which is going to make that number 21,000, right?
County Council?
Thank you. And so if I could, so those folks are still, looks like they're paying a lesser rate than the identified ones up here, ODOT, CFPA and whatnot. Is that because the ODOT, CFPA and the others listed above there have more than just the radios and they're occupying and using more?
Right.
Okay. All
They're
right.
occupying
All right,
space,
sure.
they have their own, they have equipment in there,
Okay.
and exactly. And these are,
Yeah.
these folks are just users.
Lesser presence.
Yeah,
Yep.
they
Okay,
don't have
got
all
it.
the
Yep.
equipment in there.
Sure.
And I've got some costs in there for us, which are much closer. These are the more of the ODOT rates. I still think these should probably be a little bit higher, but these would all have to be gone through and adjusted accordingly. So when I look at this, we're getting closer. That's not using any title funds. And I think if this number goes up with these agencies that aren't paying, if we can get where we need to be there and massage this a little bit, we're gonna be right about where we need to be at the $83,000 cost a year.
I know you're talking about annual stuff. I'm wondering, are there any, and I know we won't use Title III funds, but are there any other, there used to be emergency operation radio monies.
And
I think OWIN, I don't know if that's the right thing, but is there any other funds besides Title III that could supplement this at some kind of a grant level? Just asking.
Yeah, and I'm not aware of any, but I think that would be a question for the county accountant.
Okay.
Like I said, I discussed with Louise prior to this, that was the main, the Title III there was the main thing that was specific to towers
Right.
and communications.
And it's hard to rely on those too, like you said, they're not always there.
Yeah, I hear this is very old money
Yeah.
and earmarked, and so, but it's gonna run out within a year, or in a year, another year, probably one more cycle or budget cycle. So, no, these are just kind of numbers, and you don't need to go through all
Yeah,
that.
no, I don't.
That kind of added up. to
I
all
don't
my
think
other
you do
stuff.
either, Doug.
Yeah,
I think you're good, really.
Yeah, that added all my other stuff up.
Yeah.
So, back to your question, John, about
Mhm.
a capital fund, basically, is what you're getting at.
Mhm.
So, as I looked through all the agreements some time ago, I found that the county had earmarked a certain amount of everybody's payment for the year and broke it out into depreciation into like the backup generator based
Mhm.
on like an 18-year
Lifespan.
service life. Broke some stuff out for batteries, and a few things. So it amounted to about $2,000 to $3,000 for the whole year that they were taking out of everybody's money coming in for the fund.
All of them together?
All of them together.
Okay.
Okay, so, and in turn, on top of that, they were taking that money and putting back into the maintenance fund, and it went away. They just used it in the
Mhm.
maintenance fund. So it never got put in the capital fund. So when Louise came along, I talked to her about that, and I should way back up a couple years when Gary Short was here. I had talked to him, and I said, here's what's going on, and we need to have a capital fund and get paid properly at our site, and a portion of that should go in here so that we could put that towards new equipment for the site. And Gary said, I absolutely agree. So he helped me, and I put together a capital fund, which you'll see. And so last year, when I worked with Louise on the budget, I explained to her that these dollar amounts were being set aside for those replacements of backup generators and those kind of things, but they've never been captured. So last year we did. We finally got some, and it's a few, I don't know, there might be $1,000 now in there. So it started. The stuff that has been earmarked in the past is now going where it should be going, but we have a long ways to go. The other part of the last piece here, see if I can, this is off to the side. This is actual income from AT&T. And my feeling is that could help go into a capital fund for equipment down the road if we can get all these costs straightened out and get this number caught up with our $83,000 of cost to run the sites every year.
Well, I think we need to be sure and charge these various users, including the ones that currently are paying and the ones that aren't paying anything, besides the full operational cost of those pieces of equipment, which I think the ODOT numbers are measuring. What I'm not sure is if the ODOT measurings are also, those ODOT fees also include a capital replacement fund component. My guess is they don't, but maybe they do. So it may be that we would need to charge these folks more than what you're showing by a modest amount.
And I would agree, and I don't know if ODOT, that came to my mind. I haven't got a chance to talk to them. But that's a very good point. And I would certainly think that in fact, in some of the agreements, it states things that they know that they should pay. I mean, it talks about in a lot of them, maintenance on the sites and all these other things that they know that they should be paying a portion of, and those things haven't been charged to them. They still pay their rate, but nothing additional. We go up and, we send mechanics up and we work on fences and doors and we spray and mow and whatever it is. So we have a lot of additional costs there that aren't getting spread out to the users, even though it specifies in their agreements that they are liable for it. So I found a lot of stuff like that.
One more question. You got out of the screen, but you had the Curry County rate, and it was about $2,500, $2,550, and the market rate. Does any of that 70% ballpark apply to these rates also? On a lot of the earlier rates, it was like it would be about 30% of the market price, or
Right.
70% discount, basically. Does that any of those same general percents apply to these rates that we just talked about?
The last one?
Correct.
Yeah, that is the 70% discount rate that you were looking at.
I didn't.
If I'm on the same page with you.
Yeah, I don't think so.
On these rates?
No. On the current rates versus the market rate, where you had Curry County rate, ODOT rate,
Oh, the
market
next
rate.
one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This
is the one.
Clearly,
you
that's
guys
not
were getting a
close
little
to those
excited
general percents that you have talked about previously.
Yeah. So this is based on what we have. These are here's what we're paying now. Here's what they look like at ODOT's rates, and this was just a comparison if Day Wireless owned. These are actual numbers that if Day Wireless owned our sites, this is what they'd be charging.
But does that 30%?
I believe the answer
apply?
is yes, right? The ODOT rate,
Yes.
you're a
This
small
is
county.
This is a 70% discount right here of what the number would look like.
I'm not following that percent.
I'm
not following that percent.
No,
That's the
you're
reason
trying
I
to
asked.
match numbers you can't match, because
Well-
remember, the original sheet had the ODOT, different ODOT rates depending on where you
Well,
were.
yeah, but the ODOT rate is not 30% of the market rate here.
Oh.
That's why I asked the
right.
question. I'm not following.
Well, no, this
It's more like 20%,
Oh,
and that's the
okay.
reason I asked, are these columns also typical of that 30, 70?
yes,
And,
they are.
but they're not
They
here.
are, and probably part of the reason is that the way this was put together is that we took a total cost here and divide it by the radios that each of us use, and we get a percentage of what that would be of that amount, and so it's not going to match exactly the discount,
Okay.
if you can catch that. And that's something I worked with Day Wireless a little bit on, and that's kind of, and I asked them about kind of the same thing, and they explained to me also that this is based on a percentage, so these numbers aren't exactly.
Aren't 30 of,
Yeah,
something.
they'd be slightly different,
Okay.
just a percent or so, not a bunch.
well, there seem to be a bunch to me.
Well, some of them are, yeah, quite
Well,
different.
all of them.
Yeah, well, virtually all of them, yeah.
What are you comparing to? Then? Maybe
He's
Well,
looking at
in
the market
prior-
rate.
In the prior columns,
Oh,
you
the market.
typically showed on
Yeah.
that.
Oh,
on
no,
that
no.
percent. That's
Maybe
the
I
reason.
mislabeled that. That rate right there is what Day Wireless would charge us if they
Or
owned
what
the
we've
site.
talked about, market rate, correct?
Yeah, and the market rate, I think that's what they base most of theirs
Yeah.
on. But I did notice, I had them run some rates for me at what they call market rate and what ODOT calls market rate. They were slightly different.
Okay.
So
Okay.
if, these probably wouldn't exactly match.
Okay.
on that. But if you went back to ODOT's
Yeah, there we go.
rate here, if I can grab that again.
So what this chart shows as a private rate, or market rate, if you will, is different than what Day Wireless says is the market rate. Is that what you're saying, Doug?
Yeah,
Okay.
slightly different. But what they did is they used mostly these numbers, but I just noticed that when they did it, they charged differently for the rack space than
okay.
ODOT would. So that slightly skewed the numbers. And to tell you the truth, I didn't think anybody would catch that except for maybe Commissioner Hudson.
Yeah, well, of course.
And but-
Well, if it wasn't such a big difference, I wouldn't have.
Yeah.
But you're saying
Yeah.
here that the rural, less than 25,000, while you're on here, the private,
Yeah.
let's just take the
Yeah.
top, is $4,057, the first one. And then just go left, apply 70% discount. So I
Yeah.
thought, if that applies in this other sheet, then it doesn't apply because the math doesn't work out that way.
Sure.
That's the only reason.
I had a feeling that would come up, and I tried to actually get a hold of Day Wireless for the last 2 days, the gal that works on this part of it.
Okay.
She's been out of the office for 2 months.
Oh,
I
wow.
got an email back yesterday that says, yes, I'll be available tomorrow. And that's exactly what I was going to talk to her about, to try to make sure I had that straight.
Sure
And I
you
never
were.
could make contact with her.
Sure you
And
were.
so I didn't get to discuss that. Hey, I couldn't even make up a good story like that. Come on.
That's true. That's true. Okay, thank you.
That's kind of an overview for everybody, and it was really informational, and I know numbers are boring and a lot of stuff, but I just hope that it would give everybody a little bit of insight and try to look at where we should go, where we could go, and I guess the last piece was that I wanted to talk, well, 2 things. One is that our users that aren't paying the proper rate and the people that aren't paying anything at all, my thought is we would send a friendly letter to everybody soon and explain our situation. And of course, the county's been subsidizing through other funds to make the tower fund work, and we all need to pay our fair share to be in the site. So,
And with budgets coming up for all of these
Yeah.
entities, it would be sooner than later. Now would be the opportune time to do so, because
is.
they're not, that they can at least consider it for their
They're-
upcoming budget.
yeah, that was the thought, exactly.
I think also it's the opportune time in addition because our current systems are failing. And so
Yes.
this is another reason why we need to have them pay their true share of operating cost, and again, their true share of ultimately replacing so much of the stuff that needs to be replaced.
Yeah, that's going to be a big challenge.
Yep.
But we have to change directions or get things going in the right direction so that the tower fund can take care of the towers. There's not adequate revenue to do that at this time. So, and then the last thing I kind of wanted to discuss was the future management of the tower sites. So everybody I've talked to in the state always asks me, why does the roadmaster manage the tower sites? And I've talked to the sheriff guys about it a little bit, and I think the mutual feeling was that the road department had money and at one time, and somebody shook hands and said, here, let's just give it to these guys. And so, nobody coming into this position is I shouldn't say nobody, but most people aren't going to have much knowledge of the sites, how they run, and all the equipment in them. And this was in the sheriff department before. I don't think they have any interest in it, but I'm just throwing it out there if maybe there is something out there or somebody that could manage the sites and pay attention to them like they need the attention that they really need to function properly and keep up with them. And so I've taken quite a bit of time and spent with them because I felt that they were under my guard, that I needed to do that. And so I came up with, all the issues that I found and trying to redirect and get this part of it running. But in the future, I don't know if the road department's the place for it, and I'm just bringing that up.
Do you have any data statewide where it typically falls?
Well, typically with the bigger agencies, they have their own communications department, or so ODOT does, and so it's a much bigger deal. But I don't know, Joel, if you know of any, but
Yeah, I don't know how it works for other places.
I don't either. It's something I could talk to other counties about, but it's something to think about, or at least write it into the roadmaster's job description.
Talk to some of the other counties
Yeah,
also.
yeah. So, and then I think that's the
Oh,
one
I'm
last
sorry.
thing, Joel, was that we
That.
Yeah, there are firms
But
that do it. Yeah.
one of the things that came up, and I'm not sure if it was from Council Huddle or the prior council to the question, it got back to you really don't want to pursue that because, again, of all the different entities that have use of this and what you might get into, you could end up with 30 or 40, look at all the players that they said that would really complicate doing something with a third party like that.
yeah.
That was
Yeah,
just
I-
a quick.
I don't see that part of it.
Yeah.
But I would say on that maintenance piece that you're talking about, I don't see it being an issue for the road department.
Yeah.
We go take care of it. And
Well, this was for ownership of the tower, the whole works.
Oh, yeah,
But
that's.
This was,
Yeah.
and there
Well,
are,
usually-
they were,
Usually the owner makes that decision,
Yeah.
whether, how they're gonna take care of the physical
well,
structure.
again, I think it had to do with existing agreements. That's the
Oh, okay,
that's
message
sort of
that I
something-
got.
that
They
is
said,
in
don't
our-
even, you
That's
could
in
be.
our agreements that we're
Yeah.
responsible for all that. And that's not an issue as far as the maintenance on the site.
Yeah, okay.
And we get reimbursed by the tower fund.
Right,
for
right,
our
okay.
stuff. So I don't see that as being an issue as much as managing all the rest of it, day wireless and all the stuff that we
Mhm,
kind of talked about today. And then there's a,
No, we just want to let the council know that we are going to be presenting tomorrow to the Lipsick Council, letting all the public safety partners that are there know what the county is looking at, know what the situation is, and knowing what direction we're going to be going with just the towers, and some other issues that we're going to see some significant cost increases on in this next year. It seems like it's all hitting at once. Oh, thank you, Dave.
thank you. So I'm kind of wrapped up here. If anybody has any questions, I'm open.
I'm just kind of processing it all, one of the first things that come to mind, you mentioning working with Milliman. For years it's been discussed about having one system, how we could bring everybody together. And then I'm looking at your rural fire departments and you know, their budgets are just incredibly tight, and yet where'd we be if we didn't have these towers? So there is tremendous pressure on us to get this done somehow. Again, bring everybody together. So as far as the job description of this, could you estimate the portion of your time and what would you have time to maybe write up a job description on this? And do you also have a recommendation on where we might be able to plug this in and get keep it in-house?
I guess that's something.
Or put it in, as you said, put it in the job description of the roadmaster.
Yeah. It does. It can be pretty involved at times, so it does add to the job a bit. That's something I could look at, and I think I would probably have some more discussions with the sheriff department. Just toss some stuff around, unless you guys or John, that you had any ideas from your previous experiences or anything like that. So.
Any other questions?
Not for me.
Very well done, and thank Joe also
Thank you.
for,
Yeah, thank you.
for the
Great
for the
job.
input.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
I gotta grab my.
You can take that mouse with you.
Well, we have ordered
We have.
two, and
Yeah,
that
I'm not sure what
hopefully
happened.
will
Yeah, so I've started a letter. I've got the sheriff's department looking
The
at
three
it,
of us, and the sheriff can coordinate.
and it was gonna come to you after that, and now that you're here.
Yep, I
it'll
need to
go
see
you.
it.
So
Yep.
that's the process. I would like to get that thing together by the middle of next week.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely, the sooner the better.
So since we're this close
Mhm.
to having it ready,
Yeah.
and I'm not gonna be around long, so we need to make it happen.
Yeah, and you said the timing's good. People are starting to think about their future budgets, and so this is just, we're at the outreach stage of some big changes in the towers, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay.
well, and for many it's going to be reasonable. What took you so long? You know?
Well, I do have some other things to do.
No, I just meant. I meant.
No, he was talking about you.
Not
He
you,
was-
yeah.
Why did it
Yeah.
take the county so
No,
long
I-
to do it?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so
That's the
there's
first
not
thing
going to
that
be
come
an
to mind
argument
when
necessarily.
I looked at this.
Yeah.
I don't want to beat anybody up, but that was really shocking
Yeah,
to
it
find
is
out
shocking.
all the things that I found out. And, you know,
Do you have, just, and it's a sidebar issue totally, but any idea how particularly the folks that are up there not paying anything, and I'm not asking you to name names or point fingers, but how in the heck would they even have gotten there?
very good question.
Don't really know. Okay, that's fine.
That is very good, and I've made it a point, there's been a lot of other people come and ask to go in there that are non-payers and want to stretch wires and antennas out up there, and I've tried to keep everybody
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
It could just get too messy, and
Oh,
then,
yeah.
then I found out about all these, and then I was really scratching my head, so.
And you said on one of the lists that there were more. You knew there were more. Now you were finding. I think you mentioned the hospital for
Yeah.
as an example.
Yeah, and so I just found out when I walked in the room today. So there's lots others, and maybe not lots others, but there are others that should be on that list. And
I saw Coos Curry Electric included in some categories, but not in others as well, as a user.
oh, really?
Yeah. But,
So you're not aware of that one?
no, he's
Well,
aware of it. It's
no,
in his,
they
it was in the
are.
report.
They
Yeah.
they have an agreement with us
Yep.
for some of the sites, and they do pay. But you know, they're not at the rate. They're not at the going rate at all. So
Do we have any other comments or? Thank you.
yeah,
we
great,
will.
great job.
Thanks for letting me.
Thank you,
put that
Doug.
out there.
We will then. It's 3:17. We will adjourn the meeting.